Hey everybody, welcome to another live stream. This one is going to be assembling the ASM2 Faceshell kit slash PS4 Faceshell kit for Spidey. I say slash because all it really takes is a different set of lenses. They're basically the same shell, and a different set of lenses gets you that different mask. For now, I'll focus on ASM2 because the PS4 one is still kind of in the works. But basically, I just want to use this stream to go through the whole construction process, what you need to know to finish your kit. I've got a big batch of kits waiting to go out, and these instructions are basically the only thing left. So without further ado, I will first go through everything that you get when you get a kit. So obviously, you get the ABS face shell. That is what goes underneath the Spider-Man mask and gives it the shape of the shell from the movie. And then you also get the clear plastic that is used for the lenses. You get 2 layers of it. And the reason for those 2 layers is so that you can sandwich mesh in between the 2 layers of plastic and to keep the mesh, give the mesh the curve of the lenses that way. So you get the clear plastic for the lenses. You also get, the vinyl mesh. This vinyl mesh is what gives it this texture. Let me switch to my other camera really fast. Okay, so the vinyl mesh is what gives it this texture, and you apply that mesh inside of the plastic so that it's not on top and it stays really glossy and shiny. You also get a much finer, thinner mesh that goes underneath the vinyl mesh, and that's what I was saying just a second ago. You use your 2 layers of plastic to sandwich the mesh between those 2 layers, and that keeps it pressed up against that top layer and makes everything look nice and cohesive. You also will be getting 2 colors of mesh. So you can either choose to use white mesh or you can choose to use black mesh. I usually use black mesh because this kind of makes it a little easier to see from inside of the lenses. It keeps light from bouncing around inside of the shell and making it harder to see out. But it also kind of darkens the color of the lenses a little bit, so you can use white mesh like this and sandwich it underneath your plastic, and that gives you a lot more of a shiny white look that you get, you expect from a normal Spidey mask. And so when you combine those 2 layers, the vinyl mesh and the thinner mesh, it really does a lot, because this lens right here doesn't have that thinner mesh inside of it. It only has the vinyl mesh. And you can see that you can see through it pretty easily. It doesn't obscure what's underneath very well. So you want to, if you don't want people to see in that easily, you'll want to put a mesh underneath that, and I'll go through that. The next thing you get, of course, is rare earth magnets. You'll get enough to attach 3 to each lens, and then you'll attach 3 underneath the shell. And so that's what pulls the lenses onto the face shell. You'll get a few extra magnets as well, and those extra magnets will be used in the gluing process. And I'll go into that in a second as well. Next, what you'll get is the rubber fog seal. And I have to kind of explain this a little bit because you might not make a lot of sense. So the rubber fog seal, let me switch views. Basically, the rubber fog seal goes inside the face shell. Goes inside the face shell, like basically sort of right here. And so what it does is it keeps the fog inside the face shell. So it runs above your nose, below your eyes, and then to the other side of the face. And this sort of compartmentalizes the inside of the face shell. So rather than your breath just coming right up into the lenses and fogging the lenses, your breath has to stay in the compartment, the bottom half of the face shell, and then go out the air holes. Ventilation is always pretty tough because you put air holes into the face shell itself. Can't really see this too well, but there are air holes there that you can see, and you cover them with spandex. So ventilation is just really hard in these costumes because there's just not a clear path for air to go in and out. Sorry, I'm not really chatting as much in the comments right now either. I'm trying to kind of cover as much information because I want this to be the companion video to the kit, so that you get the kit and then you come to this video and basically work along with it to get your kit done. So moving on, the next thing that you get is a little bit of padding. So this is later on, once you've finished most of the shell. And this is just really simple adhesive-backed craft foam, and you'll get a square of it like this. And that works really well for like pressure points. If there's a part of the shell that kind of digs into your head or up an edge is sharp or something, you just apply a little bit of this inside the shell and it'll make it a little bit more comfortable. And then there's thicker foam. This is a upholstery foam that you'll get. And you can put this like in the forehead or on the sides of the lenses, anywhere where you want the shell to push away from your face a little bit. Okay, so that's what you get with the kit when you purchase from me. And so it's basically everything you need. You don't need to do any heat forming. I'm on the fence about the mesh only lenses because I'm not sure how much I would be able to do for a kit, but I'll figure that out more later. Basically, this is the classic lenses we're going over right now. You'll get everything you need. Everything's basically heat formed. If you look at the frame here, this is how you'll receive it. It's already sanded and bent and everything, so you won't have a ton of framework. And it's also going to come glossy like this. This is not paint. This is just the plastic itself, which helps because it's a really durable surface and it won't scratch or anything. Well, it won't scratch easily, I should say. Okay, so that's what you get. What you're going to need is a couple of tools and materials here. So probably the first thing that I'll go through is you'll need a drill of some kind, and this is for drilling your air holes. You could use a handheld drill or a manual drill. Those are really old, but drills are pretty easy to come by. You probably know somebody who owns a drill, like an uncle or a grandpa if you don't have one yourself. And then for the drill bit, I recommend about 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch for the hole, for the air holes. You can pick your own size drill bit for the air holes, but keep in mind that if you're doing air holes, if you're drilling air holes, if they're too big, they eliminate the detail of the shell itself. So like imagine I were to drill an air hole that was 1 inch in diameter. That would really take away a bunch of detail and the fabric would just go straight across that hole and you'd be able to see it through the mask. So that's an exaggeration, but that's why you can't do air holes that are just way too large. And then if they're too small, you're not getting enough airflow through them. And then also you can drill as many holes as you want. You could conceivably just cover the entire shell with air holes, but you have to be careful with that because if you do that, you're going to kind of reduce the stiffness of the face shell. If you look at this, it doesn't really deform that easily when I press on it in either direction, and that's exactly what you need because spandex will really pull and kind of deform a face shell when it is fine, when you're wearing it. So if the plastic is too thin or the shell has too many air holes, it'll squeeze and kind of the shape will deform a little bit. So that's the drill. You need a drill, find one. Your school might have one. Just bring the shell in and see if they'll let you use the drill for a little while. Next, I'll talk about glue. So you might be able to get away with just super glue. This is professional liquid, so that means it comes out as a liquid, not as a gel, and so it'll kind of spread out into little nooks and crannies, and it'll dry. This stuff dries or cures in about 30 seconds. It dries so fast, which is really helpful when you're gluing magnets and stuff because you can't have them sitting for too long gluing. Well, you can, but it's easier when you can take it apart quickly. Some other glues you can use. This is epoxy. This is Gorilla Glue, but you can use any epoxy. It's quick setting again. It only takes 5 minutes to set. And with epoxy, these two parts of the glue mix together, and you stir them together, and then it gives you 5 minutes of working time, and then it's one of the strongest gluing connections. And you want to make sure with epoxy, this one specifies that it's clear. Sometimes epoxies can have a yellowish color, and so you'll want to be careful that you get one that's clear, because if we're gluing magnets onto the lenses, you might actually see that glue a little bit. So make sure that you get a clear variety. The next glue is Go-To glue. I like this glue a lot. It's a lot like E6000, which is sort of a rubbery glue. It comes out a lot more viscous, sort of like syrup, rather than this super glue, which is liquid. The Go-To is rubbery and viscous, and that's really good for if say you're gluing something that's flat to something that's got a sort of curved surface. The Go-To glue will kind of fill in those like extra gaps around either side, whereas the super glue will only glue on the area that's making contact, which makes it likely to break, whereas the Go-To will fill those other areas, so it'll have a little bit of support on either side. So that's why, I recommend Go-To for places like gluing magnets inside your shell, and that way the Go-To is much more impact resistant, and that's because of that rubbery sort of consistency to the glue. It's much more likely to kind of absorb impact, whereas super glue, I've noticed the problem in the past where with super glue you'll glue magnets onto your lenses or your facial or something, and then if you drop them, or that's the most likely thing to happen, is that you'll drop it while you're wearing the costume, and that sudden impact will crack the glue. It'll crack the magnet off, and that's probably the biggest problem people have with their face shells, with things breaking wise, is those magnets popping off. So that's why I recommend those other two varieties of glue. But you can do super glue. It's just that you might have to do some repairs every now and then. Next up is Snips. These are just airline snips. You can use shears or thick scissors or strong scissors, basically anything that can cut through this clear plastic and can also cut a little bit into the plastic around the edge here. You can see that the edge is rough. I do trim the shell a little bit, but it's still a rough edge. So you want to be able to have something that's strong enough that it can go in here and pretty easily bite in and trim. So like I said, normal scissors or kind of like kitchen shears, stronger scissors will possibly be able to do that for you, but I just recommend getting a pair of these shears. They're not very expensive. They're only like $10 or something. And you'll probably end up using them a lot. They have a lot of use. Next is some regular scissors for different things. You'll need a wide roll of masking tape. I use this for the vinyl step. I use this masking tape to kind of sort of clean out this vinyl. If you look closely, I actually make this vinyl myself, or cut it myself. I don't make the vinyl. I cut it myself, but what that means is that you have to do the weeding, which means you have to weed out all of these little tiny tabs that are inside of the mesh. And this masking tape will make that job a lot easier. And I'll get into that more once we get to that step. Next, you'll want some little clips. These clips will be used when we're gluing parts together, especially when you're gluing two halves of the lenses together. You'll use these clips to hold everything in place while it's gluing, and that allows you to not have to sit there and press it. and you can line everything up really well. You can buy these at Home Depot. They're not very expensive. They're like 75 cents a piece. It's nice to have a lot. You don't necessarily need Scotch tape because you have the masking tape, but Scotch tape helps. It's a little easier to use than masking tape, I think, so I use that. Paper towels. I use this while I'm gluing and then also while I'm cleaning off the plastic for the lenses. Going with that, I use Windex. You don't have to buy name brand Windex, and it doesn't have to be like vinegar or multi-surface or anything. I just use this to clean out the lens frame or the lens plastic, clean all the dirt and debris off of that before I apply vinyl or glue everything together. And then you'll need aluminum foil, or aluminium if you're from some weird place. Just kidding, my place is weird. It should be called aluminium. But anyway, you'll just need a little bit of aluminum, so that aluminum foil. And what this is used for is when it comes time to glue magnets to your lenses, or basically work with your lenses at all. It helps to put this tin foil over, and then you stick everything in there and you glue everything on, and then that allows you to pull from underneath the magnets. Because when you're gluing magnets, sometimes the magnet connection is stronger than your glue. So you'll go to pull your lens off, and the magnets will just rip off because the glue didn't hold as well as the magnetic connection. So the foil helps that because we pull from underneath the magnets. But I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. And I think that does it for materials here. The only thing else I can see is a Sharpie. I use that for a few different things, but that's a pretty simple supply. Oh yes, and then sandpaper. You'll just need a little bit of 80 grit and then something finer like 320 grit. That's what this is. And with sandpaper, the lower the number, the rougher it is. So this 80 grit is a lot rougher, and this 320 grit is soft. So to basically just jump right into what you do once you get your shell, the first step is to refine the face shell itself, because we're going to be gluing magnets inside of the shell so that the lenses have something to pull down onto. But before we can do that, we need to get the shell sanded and cleaned up, and then get the air holes drilled and get that sanded and cleaned up so that we have that to work with, and we don't need to worry about that after that point. So the first thing you do is take your Snips or your strong scissors and look around the edge, and you can actually see there is a defined edge that's formed into the plastic that I trim slightly on the outer edge of. And you can follow that. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see it in the light that there's just a little bit of a crevice in there. And so you just go around trimming on the inside of that crevice, and it might help to take a silver Sharpie and trace that edge so that you know exactly where it is. But I've done this so much that I can just basically eyeball it. And so basically, you go through, and I'm just going to switch views here. You go through and pretty simply trim around. I'm sitting here thinking I probably should have told you to wear safety glasses, because there is a slight chance that when you're cutting this plastic, you can snip it, and if there's some tension there, it can fly off, and you wouldn't want that to hit you in the eye. So maybe better safe than sorry to wear safety glasses, but it's not that dangerous. It's not like using a power tool or anything. So yes, you just go through and trim around these edges. And I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to go through and kind of cover the concepts. I'm not actually trying to get an entire shell finished here. So you go through, trim all the way around the edges and get a nice kind of defined edge there. And then you take your 80 grit sandpaper and go ahead and run it along those edges. I won't do too much of that because that probably sounds pretty horrible. But you run it along the edges, you sand, and you just make sure that the edge is as smooth and not sharp as possible, because if the edge is sharp while you're wearing the costume, it'll dig into your head, and that's another place where this foam can kind of come in handy. You can apply a little bit right next to the edge so it kind of softens that edge a little bit. But the key thing is just to make sure that you're sanding, and you want to sand at not just perpendicular to the edge of the face shell. You also kind of want to round that edge, so kind of sand at an angle, and then sand flat, and then sand at another angle, so that you're getting a rounded edge, not a flat one, because a flat edge has sharp corners on either side. So you want to kind of round that as you go around. And then, once you've got the outer edge of the face shell totally nice and refined, you move into the inside of the eye sockets. I went ahead and trimmed the eye sockets. I'm just going to go ahead and do that on every kit, because you would need a Dremel or a little bit more of a heavy-duty tool, and so it would be unfortunate if that's the only reason that you need that. So I just go ahead and cut these eye holes out, and then you can't trim the eye holes the same way that you can around the outer edge, because it's just too hard to get your snips inside that small shape of the eye hole. If you have a Dremel, you can use sanding bits. That's how I do it. It's a lot easier to get a Dremel into this tiny little eye socket shape. But if you don't have a Dremel, that's totally okay. You just need to use your sandpaper, and you can sort of see the rough edge around here. Just take your sandpaper, use a little elbow grease, and just work at it for a little while. ABS is a great material. It's really machinable and sandable, so it just takes a little bit of working and sanding, and you can sand it to a nice, smooth shape. And again, you want to make sure that the edges are round, not sharp in any way, because this is also an edge where the fabric of your mask will rub up against it a little bit, so you don't want that to be sharp and catch on that at all. So you go through, sand the inner edge of the eye socket, get it to a nice, smooth, refined shape. And then the next thing you do with that is you want to go in and kind of touch up the inside of the magnet slot. It's going to be a little difficult to show you this, but you can see that that's the inner bump of the magnet slot. It's just a little slot where the magnet sinks right into place, and it holds the magnet from sliding around. And so to prepare that for gluing the shell magnet in, you should go through and just flatten that inner bump from that magnet slot. Basically, I'm just thinning the plastic that will be between the magnets. You'll have a magnet on the inside, and then the lens magnet will attach on the outside. So you want to get rid of as much plastic that's going to be in between them as you can. And the other thing about that is it roughs up the surface so that when you glue your magnet in place, it will hold. It'll have more to hold on to rather than just a totally curved surface, which will be a little more difficult for it. So you go through and you flatten each little magnet bump, and that's basically all you need to do for sanding the inner eye sockets, and that gets you to drilling your air holes, your ventilation holes. So this is actually another spot where the masking tape is going to come in handy. You can, if you want, just go straight at it and just start drilling face shell holes wherever you want, but I think it's a little bit better of an idea to take some masking tape, put it over the area where you're going to be drilling your holes. Okay, so the masking tape is having a little bit of trouble sticking right now, and that's because I have to use a lot of mold release and stuff when I'm forming the actual face shell. So one thing you might notice is that you might have to use your Windex just to kind of clean your shell off. And we'll be cleaning it more once all the air holes are drilled and all the sanding is done, because you'll want to get all of that dust off of it. So I'm just cleaning all of the oil and stuff off of the front of the face shell here so that I can stick masking tape to it. still have trouble. But what this allows you to do, just go in and sketch. You can use a ruler, or I guess that'd be a little tough, but it's something with a straight edge that can bend around the curvature of the face shell. I'm just drawing straight lines so that the holes are basically aligned but evenly paced. I'm starting from right underneath where the nose and the nostrils are, and then yeah, so you just sketch these lines, and then I'm going to make little notches. And you can see I'm alternating here and basically just eyeballing it. But if you want your shell to look really nice and just look not sloppy, then you'll probably want to like actually measure out the distance between these notches. But that's a good way to just get the general placement of your air holes in. And so you just need air holes in the general area of the mouth. And then once you've got your lines and your little notches started, you can take your drill and, while making sure to actually hold it in place. And if you don't have a lot of experience drilling or drilling plastic, you might want to ask someone to help you out, because this is a sort of dangerous, a little bit tricky task here, because it's possible that while you're drilling these air holes, you might slip and get your finger or something like that. So you always want to be really careful that you're going straight into the face shell. I'm not at an angle here. I'm not drilling like this. I'm not drilling like this. Always trying to go in just as directly as possible. And it's just as easy as that. And so you can see after I drilled that hole, I press a little bit, but for the most part, I let the speed of the drill bit do the cutting and the work of making the hole. And then what else I do, I move it in and out, and that gets rid of any little flaps or tabs of plastic that might have been left over from being on the actual hole. Sorry, I got distracted there. I'm just now realizing if I want to drill holes into this face shell or if this is someone's actual face shell. But I think it's fine. I think that they'll probably be okay with me drilling a couple of holes in their face shell. But basically, that's what you do there. And like I said before, you can drill as many or as few holes as you want, but you do need some kind of ventilation, at least down near the mouth. And then the other thing you can do is you can also do ventilation holes at the top of the shell, especially if you're using the fog seal, the rubber fog seal that cuts off the inside compartment of the shell. You'd need ventilation up here as well. So it's good to have those two separate areas of ventilation. If you look at this one, this is Chris Havoc's shell. It's got all the holes in the upper forehead, and then all of the holes down here in the front of the mask, and that makes it just a lot easier to breathe and exist while you're wearing this face shell. And I make my holes with a template. I have a template that I use that just makes it really easy to know where to drill every hole. And so that's for mass production. If you're just doing one single shell, this is probably the best method to do that. So that basically gets the shell ready for gluing magnets inside of these magnet slots. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. And I'm actually going to do that for Chris's actual shell. So, since we're dealing with magnets and glue, once again, when I do the magnets on the inside of the shell, I use Go-To glue, which is like E6000, but it dries really fast compared to E6000. And so I prefer that a little bit. So I start with magnets. All right, so I've got these magnets, and you have to be kind of considerate of what direction the magnets are facing. It's helpful to always have the magnets facing in a consistent direction. Basically, I have a system so that anytime I make a face shell, I know which direction the magnets are facing, and they're all pretty consistent, so that if someone wanted to buy another set of lenses or something, I could make those and not have to worry about the direction that the magnets are facing. There will probably be little marks on the magnets. These ones don't have marks on them, but with the kits that I prepared so far, I've gone through and I've marked one side on every magnet so that you always have a frame of reference for what direction your magnets are facing. This right here, this is how it helps to keep my direction right on my magnets. Basically, this is just a magnet that's taped down with its specific polarity facing out. So I always know that that's the side that faces out. And it helps a lot when it comes to gluing the magnets. So now that I know which direction I want to go, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of tape. I'm going to take this lens magnet. This isn't a magnet for the inside of the shell. This is a magnet for the lens. And you'll be able to tell the difference because the lens ones are skinnier and basically just smaller in general, and they fit into these little grooves. It's not just going to sit there, but here, I'll show it on an actual shell. Basically, it just snaps. Oh, that's inside. Oh, magnets. Okay. So basically, it just snaps into that little depression right there that is what holds it in place and gives it a specific place to snap to. So the way that we're going to make that happen to start when there are no magnets is you just place it there to start with, making sure that the Sharpie mark is on the outside or inside. Just always be consistent with it. It doesn't really matter too much. But basically, just take a little bit of tape and tape that initial magnet in place. And you'll go ahead and do that for all 3 slots. Each lens has 3 magnet indentations on the 3 different corners, basically. And that pulls it down really nice and tight. Alright, this is about as much full construction as I'm actually going to do for this thing, actually gluing all 3 of these magnets. So, now that those magnets are just taped in place on the outside, what we can do is glue the inner magnets, and they'll just snap into place automatically because the frame magnets are sitting there like they will once the frames are finished. So we take the go-to glue, screw off the cap. Anytime you're working with glue, it's a good idea to just have a little bit of paper towel. Like this is the same paper towel I used for Windex a moment ago. I'm just going to tear off a small amount and kind of fold it up into a square. And this will be really helpful for cleaning off or wiping off any excess glue that might drip around inside of the face shell. So what I do is I start, well, to begin with, I get the glue kind of coming out a little bit. The go-to container is a little frustrating because once it starts to get empty, it just gets harder and harder to actually squeeze the glue itself out. So I've kind of got the glue going now. So I'm just going to put a blob on all 3 of the little sanded lens spot or magnet spots that I've got in here. I'll show you a close up here. Okay. So you might be able to see that I've got that. Each of those little bumps has a little blob of glue on it. And now all I need to do is allow the magnet to be pulled where it wants to be pulled by that taped on magnet on the other side. So it just snapped right into place, and I kind of rub it around, I push it and make sure that the glue gets really, covers the magnet well, and that it's in the position it wants to be in. It's the best position for it. Do that with all 3. Kind of just slide the glue around so that you make sure that you've got enough, fully covering underneath. And last one. Just let it pop into place like that. And since I did a nice amount of glue on there, each one of them sticks into place, and then the glue kind of comes out on the sides and kind of spills out, and that does a lot to, further cement it in place. This glue, I will mention, it's not like permanent or anything. You can pretty easily just pick these things off if you make a mistake. But it's very unlikely that you'll drop your shell or something and they'll just snap off. So that's the basic method for gluing the magnets inside of the shell. And so you'll let that dry for about 15-20 minutes. Just set it off to the side. And the next thing that we do is move on to the lenses. Because now that we have the face shell with the magnets glued on the inside, that will let us work on trimming the lens shape and then gluing the magnets onto the bottom of the lens and then gluing the frame onto all of those things together. So I'll go ahead and dive into the whole lens construction process here. So basically, the first thing we have to do is we have to trim this clear lens plastic. It comes formed off of my buck, and you can see there's a little bit of an edge around. You can very lightly see it at the right angle, but there's a very slight edge that goes all the way around, and that's what you'll follow when you're trimming it. And also, there's a very slight little notch on the edge of your lens. And what that notch is it defines the straight edge of the lens. If you look at this face shell and mesh together, you'll notice that this mesh is perfectly flat. You want it to be just perfectly flat, because if it's off at all, it looks a little wonky. And so that little mark on the edge of the lens will help you to line up the mesh so that it's just perfectly flat when you're actually wearing the shell. And so you might want to go ahead. I might actually be doing this for everyone's kit anyway, just so that you don't have to struggle to find this little mark. But basically there will just be a little tiny Sharpie mark where that line is. And that lines up with the inside corner of the frame. And so that makes a nice flat edge for the mesh. And so when you have that, the biggest thing about this is you do have to remember that you'll have to remove this Sharpie before you glue everything together. And you can use rubbing alcohol or a dry erase marker to remove Sharpie from any surface, basically. I'll get into that in a moment, though. So basically, with this edge that you can see on the outside, You might want to even go in and trace that edge so that you're not struggling to see it while you're cutting. I don't have too much of a problem with it though. So basically, you just find that edge and you cut a little bit on the inside. The actual shape of the lens is about the perfect size of the eye socket, but you need a little bit of space all the way around the edge because the mask goes between the face shell and the lenses. So if the lens fits super snugly onto the face shell, then the mask will make the lens stick up a little bit. So you want it to have a little bit of space for the mask itself. So I go ahead and start trimming around the outside edge here. Okay, pretty easy. So I'm left with a nice little trimmed lens, and the next step is to check and make sure the shape is right. You just place it into the lens groove on the shell, and I can tell that's pretty good. It might need to be trimmed a little bit more. You just go around the edge and look and see where it's too close. Like right here, I'd say it's too close to the edge here, but it's pretty good around everywhere else. Just enough tolerance on it all around the edges so that it'll have enough room for the mask. So you just go through and refine it. And I round that corner on the inner edge a little bit. It might be hard to show you, but basically I don't like that corner to be super sharp. So I just kind of snip it a little bit and round it. And so now that we have our initial lens layer, you don't have to do 2 layers of plastic. So the next step for 2 layers of plastic is going to be tracing this lens onto the other layer and then just cutting it out so that they're both perfect. They fit together perfectly and their edges meet perfectly. But you don't necessarily need to do that. That's only if you want to put this mesh in between. If you wanted to skip putting this mesh in between, you could very easily just get away with only 1 layer of plastic. It just means that you're going to be able to see through the lens a little bit better. Like you can see how easily I can see through that lens, which is good if you're wearing it, but people can see through and kind of see your eyes, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world, but there's stuff you can do about it. And so, if you are only doing 1 layer, then you need to do the vinyl before you glue the magnets. Because basically, if you're doing 2 layers of clear plastic, you glue the magnets to the bottom of the bottom layer of plastic, and then the top layer of plastic has the vinyl and the mesh that gets sandwiched in between. But if you're only doing 1 layer of plastic, then you need to do the vinyl so that then you can glue the magnets onto the other side of the vinyl. So that's what I'm going to do next, is I'm going to go straight into the vinyl process, the applying vinyl to the plastic, as though you were only doing 1 layer of plastic, which is the bare minimum that you need to do. But it's important that you do this first if you're going to be doing only vinyl. So basically, when you're doing the vinyl process, you take your vinyl sticker, cut them apart really fast, and I'm going to take off the outer part of the sticker so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so you can see that the sticker is cut basically into the shape of the lens. But the reason why I'm showing you this is actually the wrong sticker. You want to apply the sticker on the inside of the frame. So basically that's the sticker for the other side. And so this side sticker faces the other direction. So it's counterintuitive, I know, but this is actually the vinyl for this lens because you apply it to the inside. So we're applying it to the inside of the plastic, so it's backwards basically. So to get everything ready, you get your vinyl out, got your masking tape, your thick roll of masking tape, and first things first, you want to clean the inside of the lens that you'll be attaching the vinyl to. You don't want any dirt or oil or anything between the lens plastic and the vinyl, or else that might be something that you'll see. And you also want to keep your hands really clean. You want to keep your work area free from dust. Basically just a really clean workspace in this next step because you don't want any debris or anything getting stuck to your vinyl. So, got the sticker, I've got my cleaned off lens, and what I like to do is I like to take my wide masking tape and start by making a little workspace because vinyl doesn't stick to masking tape the same way masking tape doesn't really stick to masking tape. Like masking tape is basically a wax paper with an adhesive on one side, and so it works really well for working with the vinyl because the vinyl is able to stick to it without getting ruined, which kind of helps for this next part. And so now that I've got that little masking tape work area down, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a strip of masking tape, a little longer than the sticker itself, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this masking tape past the top edge a little bit. Make sure you can see this. And I'm just going to stick that right on the top of the vinyl and kind of use my fingernail to make sure it gets pretty nice and stuck. And what this does, this is just the easiest way to weed ever. Basically, the vinyl is getting stuck to the masking tape. The actual sticker and then all the little tabs that need to be weeded out are all sticking to the masking tape. So when I go to peel my vinyl sticker off of the masking tape, all of the little tabs are going to stay stuck to the masking tape, and I'll just be left with the vinyl mesh. So take another piece, and so that makes sure that the entire piece is covered in masking tape. And you just work it on there and really make sure that it's stuck all over. And now I'm going to peel the, make sure that the vinyl comes up. There we go. So I'm going to peel both of those off. And you can see some of these little chads, or hanging chads, little tabs stayed on the wax paper. If you were to just peel it right off, you'd actually get a lot of those that would just stay on the wax paper. But because I put the masking tape on, it kind of held them all in place. And so the next step is I'm going to take that same little tab, you can see a little rounded tab there to grab onto. I'm going to be really careful. It's easy, the easiest way to ruin this vinyl mesh is to just pull from one specific point and it stretches and tears the mesh. So you've got to be careful that as you pull, you're kind of spreading out and grabbing it with more fingers and just making sure you're not pulling from a really just one specific spot, because it tends to stretch it and then eventually tear it if you do that too much. All right, and so now you can see I basically got almost all of those hanging tabs off of the vinyl mesh. There are still, it looks like about a dozen that are stuck in there. So now, this is where my little clean work area comes. I can just set it down like that, not have to worry about it sticking to the table and never ever coming up again. And what I'm going to do, this is actually a tool used for, I knew there was going to be things I was going to forget. This is actually a tool used for weeding vinyl. It's a little, it looks like something you'd see at a dentist's office. It's a little metal hook. But you can use a toothpick or anything that just has a, like you could use a pencil, the tip of a pencil or like a mechanical pencil. I'm just going through and making sure, poking those little tabs and getting them slightly dislodged. And then another thing that you might need are some little tweezers. These help to just go through and get all of those little sticky tabs. There's one. And it's tough because these little things will stick everywhere. And another thing that I'll warn you about, don't let the little tabs stick to the sticky part of your mesh because it's really difficult to get them off. And you definitely don't want to leave them there when you're applying the vinyl to the lens itself. So I poke them through, I kind of poke them and dislodge them, and then that makes them a little tab, and then you can just pick them off with the tweezers. You could probably pick them off with your fingernails, but the tweezers make it pretty easy. And you can find tweezers like this in most like makeup and beauty sections at stores, because these are like eyebrow tweezers that are used to pluck your eyebrows. And sometimes, eventually you'll just get the tweezers covered in those little hanging tabs. So I just use a paper towel and kind of wipe them off. So I'm just going through one by one. It's pretty detailed work, but really, this is why it's a kit, because if I didn't give this to you in kit version, I have to do this for every single shell and frame, which I don't mind. It just means that I have to charge more. I do offer the service of completing it myself usually, but I think the kits are really good because I have to charge enough that it's worth my time to do this stuff. It isn't just a charity pro bono type thing. So I know that there are some people out there that are younger and it's harder to afford. So that's why I wanted to do this kit. It's just so that it made it more available to people who might not have enough funds to get a finished one. But then it saves me on the labor of having to do all of this stuff. And really, it's not difficult. It's really easy. My biggest struggle is with actually just sitting down and doing it. It's so hard for me to just sit down and set aside the amount of time that this takes. Just do it. But I've gotten a lot better at it, especially after I started to raise my prices and sort of charge as much as it takes, as much as it costs me in the time that it takes to make. And also, the edges aren't, like, you don't have to be like super neurotic about the edges. I'll take this one out. But the edges are probably going to get trimmed. This is a little bit bigger than it needs to be, so that you don't have to be super perfect applying the actual vinyl. So I think this is all clean. You can basically just throw away, although, want to see something else super neat? These little chads that I took off. Watch this. perfect. Look at that. Add some texture. That'd be cool for like spaceship or something. But that probably doesn't do much for you. So yeah. Oh, I see a few that I missed here in the corner. You always just have to make sure, just double check, because if you end up assembling the frames with little chads hanging in there, it's almost impossible to get in there and get them out. You just want to be sure you've cleaned it out all the way. Okay, and so now it's time for the truly exhilarating, kind of terrifying part of applying the vinyl to the lens. And once again, I mentioned this a second ago, but the vinyl is attached to the inside of the lens, not the outside. For these ASM2 frames at least, the vinyl goes on the inside of the lens, not on the outside. It goes on the outside for my ASM1 lenses, because that's just the nature of the vinyl. It's only gold and reflective on one side, so it has to go on the outside of the lens for ASM1. But for this one, it's white on both sides, so it works really well to apply the vinyl to the inside of this layer of plastic. So again, I want to line up the holes on this mesh so that the pattern that the mesh makes is nice and flat in the end. And that's, again, what these little marks on the side of the plastic are for. That basically, between this mark on this side and this corner over here, is a perfectly flat line when the face shell is just looking forward. So to line that up, if you look at the mesh, there's actually a little tab on this outer edge. You can see a little tab and a hole, and that's the line that goes and lines up with this inner corner, so it makes it a little easier to do this next process. And so, to apply the vinyl, basically what we're going to do, make sure that you can see this pretty well. What I'm going to do is, this is sitting with the sticky side up. That's why I'm able to move it around. So the sticky side is facing up. And that's why I said earlier, your hands have to be really clean, your work area has to be really clean, because you don't want any dust or dirt or anything to stick to this part of the vinyl right now, because then it will be visible on your finished lenses. So we'll be taking this lens we have here and this mesh, and basically just line it up so that your corner, your inside corner, lines up with your inside corner here, and the notch on the edge here lines up with the notch on that edge, and just lay it down on it. So it's just lightly touching like that. So you can see it's just barely setting on top of that mesh, and it'd be really easy to peel off and remove at this point, which is good because, you know, we want to be able to make sure it's nice and perfectly aligned. Like it could maybe be moved over a little bit more down, I should say. I'll try that again. Okay, so now it's attached only on this bottom edge. This top edge is too curved. You can see that whole curve in between there. So it's nice and, you know, it's just kind of lightly touching this bottom edge. So the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and kind of reinforce how it's touching that bottom edge. Just work around and press that in a little bit. So once again, just the bottom, sort of the bottom and outside edge there. So that's basically the first step towards getting the vinyl on. This is good progress here, because you'll know if things start to go south. It won't go together this easily. There'll be wrinkles and things will be difficult, but you can always try again. Just be really gentle. You can peel it back. If you peel too hard and too fast, it can rip the vinyl itself, but you can always peel it back and try it again. So now that we have it sort of well secured around these outer edges, what we'll do is just basically with our fingers and our thumbs here, try to get it in an angle where you'll see me working here, just going to work it up around those edges and stretch the vinyl. And if it's not connected well enough on those outer edges, it'll pull off, because it's really being put under a lot of stress here to be pushed up and bent up into place. And you want to make sure that it's still keeping a pretty flat shape. All right, that was not the best one ever. I think probably it had a little bit to do with the fact that I was doing it for the camera, but it did the job. It got it all stuck down and everything. And then once everything is, basically what I mean by I didn't do the greatest job, you might be able to see right here that the mesh got a little skewed. It was stretched too much. It had to stretch too much right here. And so it just got skewed. It got kind of pulled and a little bit too much right there. And so what I can do is I can just be really gentle, pull it off, and just work it back up into place. And when you stretch a shape into vinyl, like if I were to pull this sticker off, this vinyl basically has this shape now. It's been stretched into the shape of this lens. And you just go through, once you have it all stuck down exactly the way you want, and make sure you have it all completely stuck to the inside frame. You can even use a little bit of paper towel or something to press it and make sure that it's getting nice and pressed all over. Because if you don't, if there's a little bubble or something where it's not pressed in all the way, you'll actually see that under certain lighting conditions. So this is already a pretty good lens just on its own. You can take some scissors, take it around the edges here. You can also use an X-Acto knife to trim off the extra flashing of vinyl here, but scissors will do. And it cuts really easily. Vinyl's very thin. All right, and so that's one finished lens segment there. And I mentioned earlier that if you want to remove Sharpie from a surface, you can use a dry erase marker. This is just a regular black dry erase marker, and this is just a little trick that you can use if there's Sharpie on a dry erase board. You can use this to get rid of it as well. And you can also use rubbing alcohol. Alcohol is basically the necessary component to break down the ink and get it off of the material. So you just take a dry erase marker, kind of scribble over your Sharpie mark a little bit, and mix the inks together really well. And then it just goes off the same way dry erase marker does. Easy. And I think there's another one. Yeah. So that's a really easy way to get rid of Sharpie. So now that I've got this lens with its vinyl on it, the next stage is going to be gluing magnets onto the lens in one way or another. So basically, you could just glue the magnets straight to this lens that you just made. It would just be a matter of putting the glue on the magnets and getting it stuck down. But that is only if you want the single layer with only vinyl as your lens. This is the easiest way to do it. But if you want 2 layers, what you'll need to do is you'll need to make the bottom layer first. So you want to find where the 2 pieces of plastic just like perfectly spoon together. Like literally, they're literally spooning very well. You find that spot where they're just really snug, and then just take a Sharpie, trace it along the outside, and then cut that out. I've got that shape now. And I don't have to worry about the flat, the mark on the outer edge or anything on this layer, because that only matters when you're putting the vinyl on. So I'm going to cut it out inside of this Sharpie line, because I want the bottom layer of the lens to be slightly smaller. And that way it tapers in a little bit. It's not just a straight shape going into the how best to describe that? It's not just like a flat-edged thing going on that will press into the mask more. If the bottom layer is smaller, it kind of gives it a tapered edge underneath that will work better with the mask, if that makes any sense. And I find it easier when I'm cutting lenses. You might have noticed earlier, I'm cutting from the bottom because it's easier to go around the inside than it is to cut around the outside, I think. Yeah, it's just a lot easier. For some reason, the shape of the lens kind of fights against you a little bit. And another thing I didn't mention, with the 2 layers of plastic, I include the 2 layers in every kit, but what I'm going to do is I'll give you one good layer of plastic and one that's probably not quite as good. And what that means is it might have some bumps or maybe some scratches. There are just always there's that big of a spectrum of quality when I cast these. Sometimes they have little marks and scratches, and then sometimes they come out perfectly. And so I'll try to make it so that you'll have a perfect lens, a really nice, good, perfect lens, and then a not so perfect lens. And you always want to use the not so perfect lens as your inner lens, and the perfect lens as your outer lens. They might both be really good quality, because if I'm not purposefully going to give you a poor quality lens, but if there are any poor quality ones, I give them out as the inner surface of the lens. So I've got that bottom lens trimmed and held up against the outer side of the lens, and you can maybe kind of see that. Let me get it to focus here. Autofocus? No? Okay. Well, there's a little bit more that needs to be trimmed, so just kind of work around and make sure that the 2 shapes just perfectly fit together. And now, okay. So now is time to glue the magnets onto the lens. And you can do this before you apply the vinyl. I only applied the vinyl so that I could describe that you're either going to be gluing the magnets onto this bottom layer, or you'll be gluing the magnets onto the only layer, which is the vinyl and plastic together. Because I mean, you can get away with that. This would be, I mean, this would be a good like Scarlet Spider or anything without a frame. You could just totally get away with that. And also, when people complain about being able to see inside of the lens, there are some comic designs where you can kind of see inside the lens. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that people are able to see inside the lens. It's just that it can kind of be distracting if, you know, your mask is red and has an eye hole, so you'll see red with a black hole and your eye in the middle. So that can be a little distracting. Here, I'll show you. I'll just demonstrate what that might look like. So you can see without that mesh, you can kind of see through it. Not that well, but you can sort of. It might be the angle of the light, probably. I can't get this in the camera. There you go. You can kind of see that it's just not well obscured. So that's basically like the quicker version if you don't put the mesh in there. So ideally, what you want to do is put something like this black mesh in. I'm going to use this black one because it does a good job of defeating the light that comes in through the lens, and it makes it darker inside of the lens, which, you know, further makes it harder to see inside. It basically makes it into a two-way mirror once you put this mesh on there, because it keeps the light from getting in there and illuminating what's behind the lens. But first, I'm going to do the gluing the magnets onto this bottom layer of plastic. And so once again, first things first, I want to clean the plastic a little bit so that I'm not gluing to oils or anything like that, and that will make the glue connection less strong. And now that the magnets are glued on the inside of the shell, these outer magnets work in the same way. They just stick into place where they need to when the gluing comes, the time to glue comes. So I'm going to go ahead and take these magnets off. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the foil that I mentioned earlier. And so, once again, what this foil is for, you put it on the very bottom layer up against the face shell. And you take your magnets here and you snap them in place. It might be kind of difficult to see the silver on silver here, but you snap your magnets in place. I already have an indentation of the eye hole, so it's easy for me to line up on this piece of tinfoil, but you want to go ahead and take your tinfoil and press it all the way into these nooks and crannies and make sure that it's really snugly up against your face shell. And that way, it's easy when you're taking your lens to place it into that little recession and get it lined up just perfectly. So I'll go ahead and show you the process for epoxy. It's really easy. It's just a matter of mixing the two parts of the epoxy together, and it creates the strongest bond for the magnet to the lens. I actually did some experiments, and this was the hardest one to break off with dropping it on the ground and sort of day-to-day use. So I've taken a little bit of tinfoil. I use that as my epoxy plate because it's easy to just throw away when you're done with it. I take a toothpick. Another thing I forgot to tell you you'll need, but you should be able to find a toothpick. If not, just like any kind of stick or maybe even like a folded up piece of paper, anything that you can just throw away when you're done using it. And so I want to have my face shell here and ready with the magnets sticking in their little recessions. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this epoxy. And this is 5-minute epoxy, So that means I only have a few minutes to work with it before the epoxy starts to cure and stuff. And you actually probably want to get both sides ready to glue so that you can do all of it just in one go. You don't have to. It's easy enough to just mix a small amount of epoxy. But I can already smell it. So you really want to make sure you have a well-ventilated, a lot of fresh air coming in, because epoxy is one of the smellier things that I typically use. So you just basically press down on this plunger and it pushes the epoxy out. This is an older thing of epoxy, so it's a little crusted up. So I'm going to take a toothpick here and kind of clear out the other part since it's not squeezing out. Just make sure that you get two pretty similar sized blobs of mixture. You don't want a lot more of one or the other. So you can kind of see them spilling out there. And then I'm going to pull on that plunger a little bit to keep it from just continually oozing out. And then I'm going to take a little bit of paper towel here and I'm going to clean off that tip, because it's easy for epoxy to get really nasty on the tip and then it just gets ruined and you can't use it the way I use it, like this, every now and then. You have to use it all at once or else it goes bad. So you just have to be careful so that your epoxy doesn't get old and bad. So I'm going to take my toothpick, or popsicle stick, and mix the part A and part B together of the epoxy really good. The color of the epoxy will kind of merge from yellow and white into a kind of translucent yellow. And I really don't need much at all. I'm going to use barely any of this. And what I'm going to do, what I like to do, a little technique anyway, is I like to take a toothpick like this, and I like to just break it off right about where it starts to taper, and it kind of makes a little brush. All the little broken little wood strands of the toothpick kind of makes a nice little brush. It helps pick up a nice little blob of epoxy right there. Maybe it doesn't want to focus on that. You can see there's just a little blob of epoxy on there. And so I'm going to take that little blob of epoxy, and you can see my magnet on the inner eye there. So I want to put enough on there that it covers the whole surface of the magnet, but I don't want so much that it's going to really spill out all over the edges once I put the frame on. I do want it to make full contact between the magnet and the frame, but I don't want it to be so much that it gets everywhere. Okay, so I put a little bit on all three of those magnets, and I still have a little bit of working time. You have a few minutes of working time, so it's not so stressed and rushed. So I'm going to get the piece of plastic I'm gluing ready. The other thing I want is you want 3 magnets. In this case, I would use some of the magnets I haven't glued yet, but I will give enough extra magnets that you'll be able to glue this yourself. You'll use your extra magnets to pin it in place, and I'll explain that or demonstrate that here. So we're going to pin the lens in place. I've got the magnet in my hand, one of the little rare earth magnets, and I always start with the inner corner edge. You want to start lining it up from the inner eye so that it's pretty snug, and then just make sure it fits well in the recession. And then there, I just snapped that magnet on top, and now it's pinned. It's holding the lens in place from the outside of the magnet. And so I'm going to take my other magnets here, and now that I've got just this one inner eye corner aligned, I can kind of slide the lens around and make sure it's perfectly aligned top to bottom. And that's an advantage epoxy has. If you use super glue, it tends to just glue immediately. It'll stick right where you put it. So there we go. I've got 3 magnets in a row, basically, on each of those little stacks. So you've got the outermost magnet, which is outside of the lens, the next magnet, which is being glued to the lens itself, and then the magnet on the bottom is the magnet that we glued to the face shell itself, which is holding them all in place. So now that I've gotten that done, you can opt to just let it cure like this, just sit and let it dry, but because I've got these magnets holding their adjacent magnets in position, I can take my tin foil, grabbing it from around the edges, and use it to lift the lens from below the magnets. Again, the reason I did that is if I tried to just pull the plastic off, there's a really high chance that the bottom magnets would want to stick more to the shell than they'd want to stick to the lens itself. And also what can happen is it can slide, and then it just snaps. It flies off and snaps. So you want to make sure that there's no sliding and the magnets stay perfectly in place. And I've got these exterior ones pinning them in place. And then after the 5 minutes is up and it's all cured, I should be able to just easily remove them. Just kind of, you basically have to just work the first one free, kind of wiggle it free, and then you can use it to pick up the other 2. So you'll set that aside for a little while and let that cure. Not me though. So like I said, I'm going to take this stack of magnets that I already have, because I want to, since these ones have just recently been glued, I need to pull the top magnet straight off. If I pull it at an angle at all, there's a chance that it'll force the magnet underneath to slide. So I just want to pull it straight off. And got those magnets inside, still in place, waiting to cure. A few minutes. And so now what I can do is get ready to glue the top half of the frame or lens to the bottom half. But before I can do that, I have to think about, usually when I do this stuff, I'm able to glue the magnets and then walk away from it for a day or so and then come back the next day and work on the next step. But for the purpose of the video, I want to teach you how to trim the mesh. So I need to trim this mesh now that I'm ready to sandwich it between these 2 layers of plastic. But it's going to be a little difficult because keep in mind, you've got pretty powerful magnets here. So if you were to bring a pair of scissors just around the edge, the scissors are going to be attracted to those magnets, or the magnets are going to be attracted to the scissors. And so, like right now, the magnets would probably even just fly off if I tried to trim this mesh around. So what I'm going to do, and this is actually a good way just to do it in general, I'm going to take a silver Sharpie, and I'm going to trace the outline of the lens onto this black mesh. All right. Just letting the shape of the lens guide the Sharpie. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to trim inside of this outline a little bit so that the mesh isn't sticking out from the edges at all. Okay. It's very light, and you can barely see it, but that's enough. You don't really need the biggest outline ever. So now I can take my scissors, and you can kind of see that outline I cut right there. I hear the ice cream man. It's early in the year for the ice cream man. Another thing about trimming this mesh can be difficult because it's kind of springy. It doesn't like to hold its shape. The mesh that I've got here that I include is actually really nice because it doesn't fray very easily and it doesn't lose its shape that easily. So it's pretty nice for making just a little cutout lens like that. So I'm going to go ahead and check, make sure that it fits in between my layers of plastic really well. All right, so that fits pretty well. You can kind of see here that it doesn't go all the way to the edge. That's partially because it's just not perfectly lined up. But I actually don't want it to go all the way out, because if it goes all the way to the edge, it sticks out a little bit. I don't know if you can see it sticking out a little bit on the back edge. And the problem with it sticking out is that when you go to glue the two sides together, the mesh absorbs the glue, and anything sticking out becomes this solid material rather than a soft, springy mesh. And so you want to have that out of the way. You don't want any stuff like that on the outside edge of your lenses. You just want it nice and clean. So just keep aligning this mesh until it's nice and sandwiched in there. That's pretty good. And before I do any gluing, I want to go in and once again clean anything I can. This is the last chance. Once I start gluing things, this is the last chance I'll have to actually clean inside of these two layers of plastic. And if anything gets in between these two layers of plastic, it can be really frustrating if you're not able to get in there and clean it out. So I take my Windex. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I know this isn't, the standard live stream that I do because I'm having to cover material, but I appreciate you guys being here, hanging out with me while I do this stuff. It's really hard. This is probably up there with that ASM1 stream of doing tutorials because there's just so much information to cover, and it's really hard for me to keep it organized and get through all of it. But I have to try. So that's kind of one of the things that always holds me back. Okay, so everything's clean. Put that layer of mesh in between. And I use my fingers surrounding the lens, so I'm grabbing it from all angles here so that I know that everything's pretty well and lined up. And since I'm about to start gluing, I want my clips, the little clips that I use to keep everything together. I'm going to need a little bit of paper towel to remove excess glue, because to cover that, when you're putting glue between these two layers of plastic, you'll put enough that it bridges the gap between the two layers of plastic, But then you immediately want to go and remove the excess, because if you leave a really big bead of glue on your lenses, that glue can soak in between the two layers, and you really don't want that to happen. So one, make sure you have a paper towel, and when you put a bead of glue on, don't just let it sit there sinking in between the two layers of plastic. Immediately start to remove the excess glue. You just want as much as it takes to make contact between both sides. And then also, when I do put the glue on, I don't let gravity make that happen. So if I were to put glue up here, I would put the glue on and then make sure it's not sitting in a way that the glue would want to go with gravity and go into the lens. So rather, the glue wants to drip out away from the lens if I'm holding it upside down. So you always just want to be sure that you're not getting glue in between the two layers of plastic too far. If it does happen, it's not the end of the world. There are little things that will affect the final quality, but nothing, I don't think there's really anything that's going to ruin your shell. Okay, so this is just the Loctite Professional Super Glue, and I love this super glue for this part of the process because it just dries so fast and it's really easy to get it between the two surfaces. So I'm going to start with specific areas like in between these two corners at the top of this arc. So I'm going to take my paper towel, get rid of the excess bead of glue, and take my clip, and then just like that. And continue to work around. I don't know if you can see the plastic working or the glue working its way in between those two layers of lenses. You can kind of see a dark spot on the mesh itself, but the glue is working its way up between those two layers of plastic, so that's why you have to use your paper towel to get rid of that quickly. Okay, so I've basically gotten it glued between the corners. This is basically the only actual corner on the lens, and I guess this one's a corner too. But the way I look at it is there's three corners, these two, and then this one down here. Even though it's round, it kind of functions as a corner. And so I like to glue up in between the corners, because what can happen is you can glue at the corners themselves, and then there will be a little gap between the plastic up here, and so that makes it just difficult to get them fit perfectly snug together. So I like to glue from the highest points first, at the middle of the curves where they meet together. And now I can glue the corner. So because there's a magnet right here, I'm just going to go ahead and actually pin the magnet as well. And the magnet was attracted to the clip, but that doesn't matter. It shouldn't be too big of an issue. And as you're working around, because we're just going to keep working around until it's basically glued all the way around the edge, you want to put a lot of emphasis where the magnets are, because the magnets are where most of the stress from pulling the lenses on and off are going to pull at this separation between the lenses and then also the frame later on. That's where the most stress is going to be. So you definitely want to make sure you get a good glue connection between anywhere where there's a magnet nearby. And this is why it's nice to just have a ton of these clips. I'm just able to work around, just clipping as I go. And then as I run out of clips, I just start removing them from places that have been glued for a little while. Don't need it anymore. Okay, so this basically does it for the basic glue spots. What I'll do is I'll just continue to work all the way around, getting it all the way glued so that the two pieces are just really well secured to one another. And then once I do that, I like to just let it dry for a little while. Again, usually I separate the steps so that I can let this just dry and cure really well before I start working on it again. But it's not a big deal. It's basically already glued. That's how fast the super glue works. So I can start taking off clips from some of the earlier gluing areas I did. I'm going to go ahead, just really fast. I'm moving on to gluing the frame in a second here, so I want to make sure that these glue connections are strong enough. Usually I sit here and I just make sure they're fully glued together. But for now, I just want to make sure that when I glue the frame on, it doesn't come apart. Okay, so there you go. If you were doing Scarlet Spider, that's basically all you need. Without the frame, it should fit onto this small-sized face shell pretty well. This isn't even the face shell that we were gluing it into, but it still fits in there pretty well. Get this camera to see it. So yeah, it fits into that groove for the face shell pretty well. So if you were doing Scarlet Spider, that's basically all you'd need to do. Hey, Sean. Sean is one of the people that is waiting on this big batch of kits I've got ready to go out. He just asked if it was out or not. And this video is basically what has been holding up progress on the kits. I've had some people asking about where their kits are, but this has been the hardest thing about the kits, is that I have to make sure that when you get the kit, you're able to actually put things together. And it's not just you get all these pieces of plastic. Because I've shipped a few kits so far, and without the instructions, it's pretty intimidating. Without any kind of like this, where we just go through it piece by piece. Here's what this piece is for. This is what you do here. I really just I pictured people getting their kits in the mail and then just forgetting about them and never trying to put them together. So I wanted to make sure that I have this ready, and it's really easy for people to approach. Okay, so we've got that lens all glued together. So the next step, and apparently this is something I've never done in the stream, which is surprising to me. The next step is going to be gluing the frame on. So I've got my frame right here. And again, when you get a kit, it'll already be heated and bent and ready for you to glue it, because the plastic that I use for my frames is actually pretty difficult to heat and bend. It needs to be a really high temperature, and it's really difficult because the high temperature that it has to be, has this tendency to make little micro bubbles on the surface of the plastic start to pop out. Got one right here that kind of had that happen, so I'll see if I can show it to you. You might be able to see there are little bubbles and specks. Focuses. Well, at least they're hard to see, but there are little bubbles and specks all over the surface because I had to get it so hot for this plastic to bend that it has a tendency to make little micro bubbles pop out and explode. So I try to give you the frame already pre-bent, but if you do want to re-bend it or bend it to a different shape, you can do that with a heat gun, or you can do that in boiling water. Basically just heat it up to the point where it goes flat in either boiling water or with a heat gun, and then wearing gloves, you know, bend it into the position that you want it to be in, and then put it into ice cold water, and that'll lock the shape in place. But I'm just going to go ahead and bend it for the kits just so that people don't have to worry about that. So basically, when it comes to gluing on the frame, you want to make sure that when you're gluing both frames, you're going to have everything lined up really well between the two sides. And one thing that helps for that is a little bit of masking tape. You can see on this one, I just put a piece of masking tape here, and then I also put a piece of masking tape on both corners. And so what I did was I traced the edge of the frame where I wanted it when it's time to glue, because you only have a little bit of working time when you're gluing it down. And so that helps to have that shape traced on that masking tape so that I know, and then also, especially for the middle, because it can be difficult sometimes to glue it so that the corners, the inner corners of the eye are perfectly the same distance from the middle, and then also, you know, perfectly on the same level as one another. And so that masking tape helps a lot for that. I have a little line marked on it for the middle, and then actually measured those shapes and then traced it. So that helps a lot for gluing the actual frame into place. I don't have anything like that though for this frame, but that's okay because I've done so many of these that I can just kind of do it in my sleep at this point. So that's the spot that it's going to want to be in when it comes time to glue, which is now. Okay, so everything's nice and lined up. So the strategy here, I'm only going to put on 2 or 3 really tiny, light little dabs of glue on one on the inner corner, here in the inner eye, one up here around the edge, and I usually put one like down around here too, just anywhere where you know it's going to make contact right away, like right here, it's making contact. Because despite my best efforts, it can be difficult to get the frame to perfectly line up and touch the lens everywhere all the way around. So it's only touching the lens in a few spots right now. And so you have to find where those spots are for the initial, the very initial gluing that I do here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just going to put a very small little dab of glue on the inner corner and up here on the top edge, and one here down the bottom. I'm doing a small amount so that I can temporarily, very temporarily, tack the two together just to make sure that they're glued together in the right spot. And then I'll go in, once I take the lens off of the shell, and make sure that they're further perfectly glued together. So getting everything lined up. Pressing down. And it doesn't really want to hold. You know, it's not going to glue so well that it just tacks into place immediately. Yeah, see, like I was saying earlier, there's only a few places where it's actually making contact enough to glue right now. And so I need to find those spots where it makes contact. Okay, so you get it nice and tacked together here. And then while you're still holding everything together, it's going to be a little tricky. While still holding everything together in the right spot, oh, it keeps coming up. you press from the inside of the lens. So my fingers are in the shell here. So it's basically, it's not very well glued together, but it's enough. It's enough that I know the placement of the lens and the frame together. So that's what the goal is there. It's just to get it tacked on just enough that it doesn't slide around when you take it off. It doesn't have to be perfect, and there's a high likelihood that it'll snap off. But you want that so that if it's off at all or not aligned properly, you can easily kind of break it apart and then try again. Dalton just asked about the homecoming face shell. I definitely do want to get to the homecoming face shell eventually. I know I say that so many times, but I'm close to actually getting some work done on that one. It's just a matter of getting caught up on all these other shells first. And I always get distracted by a million projects. So I accidentally just kind of launched into the next step there. But basically, now that the two pieces are there, they're tacked together enough that they're holding together, now is when I kind of do the same thing that I did earlier when I was gluing the two parts of the frame together, or the two parts of the lens together. Now I glue the lens to the frame. So, same strategy as before. I'm going to use just a little bit of paper towel with folded up so that I can use the corner, a little corner like that, to really get into the corner and wipe away any of the glue, big blobs of glue. Because once again, when you're putting glue on, you don't want it to drip down and get onto the actual lens. You don't want it to come down and get in there. So you only want to put on enough that it's gluing the two together, but not spilling into the actual frame itself. So I'm going to continue to tack this down around the outside edge. Go ahead and wipe those big blobs off. And you'll notice as you're gluing around the edge, there are some places, like if you look at this outer edge here, they really just don't make contact almost at all. And that's just the nature of the shape of the lens versus the shape of the frame having to smooth out onto the face shell. And so I'm actually going to use the go-to glue again. Once I'm finished using the super glue to make sure everything is really nice and tacked into place, I'll use the go-to glue and just fill all of those gaps. Any gap that is left between the lens and the frame, just really make sure that there's a lot of go-to glue between the two. And that is like with the magnets being glued, that helps a lot to make sure that if you ever drop your lenses or anything, rather than the super glue bond, which is like plastic, which can crack and break under too much stress, the go-to is like rubber, and so it has a lot more impact resistance. It's a lot more likely to get hit on something, but not just shatter and break right away. So now that I've gotten everything pretty well tacked down with super glue, always put your cap back on your super glue. You don't want it to dry out or get crusty. I'm going to take the go-to glue and basically, I don't know if you have any experience with caulking, like if you were to caulk between two tiles. Basically, you're just filling between two gaps, but not so much that it bulges out. You just want it to fill the gaps, but then also be a smooth shape overall. So I'm allowing this bulb of glue to come out, and then I'm using the nozzle itself to push it in between the lens and the frame, and then also smooth the shape out. And when the glue, when this go-to container starts to get empty, it gets really hard to squeeze the glue out. It's not a great design container. Oops. All right. So now I don't even have to wipe up very much excess glue or anything. You can see that shape, that glue just made a nice solid seal, essentially. And the other thing about this step is it also glues the two halves of the lenses together better, because the two halves of the lenses were also only super glued together. And that just ends up with a nice, clean, strong glue joint that doesn't get in the way, because you don't want an extra blob of glue. You have to be really careful about that. You don't want a lot of extra glue to cure, because that's going to get in the way when you're sticking it to the actual finished face shell. And another thing I forgot to mention is that this glue stage can be messy. It can be really messy. This go-to can get on your fingers, and you barely even realize it, and you think that you've wiped it off, but it can actually go from on your fingers to on the actual lens or on the actual frame on the outside. And if you're quick, you can wipe it off, but it can make little smudges. So one thing that I like to do just to be safe, and I forgot to do this earlier on, but once I get to this kind of completed stage where everything's coming together and starting to look good, I take masking tape and I just put a covering on the inner and outer surfaces of the lens without getting it in the way of the glue itself. So you would do this before applying this go-to glue. Not before you glue the frame itself on. After you glue the frame on, you put this masking tape on just to protect the lens, and it gives you somewhere to grab the frame without worrying about getting glue everywhere. So like right now, I can kind of feel it on my fingertips, and I don't want to keep passing it from hand to hand, because then I know I'm getting smudge marks on the outside of the frame. Okay, so now that I've done that go-to, here's a little tip too. So there's a little bit of space here between the frame and the lens. That must have been because the shape of the frame bent out a little bit since I heat formed it. What you can do is just take either one of these clips, although this is a really strong connection, so it might make the glue ooze out. There are different varying strengths of clips. This one's strong. It's a really strong clip. So it works well for gluing the two lens frames together. But if I were to put it here, it might just make the glue ooze out around the edges and even ooze up into the frame because it squeezes it so tight. So you can use different strengths of clip, like a clothespin clip, and use that, and that will still squeeze the two pieces together, but not so tight that it's making the glue ooze out everywhere. So that will hold while the glue cures all the way over the next 30 minutes, and that keeps everything nice and together. And so basically, once this is done, that's a finished frame. Finished lens and frame. The final thing that you might want to do to it is I take black acrylic paint. Actually, no, sorry, black latex paint that you can just buy at Home Depot. It works really well because it's this glossy black paint. You can buy a can of it for like $10. And I just take a paintbrush and I'll go over the go-to glue with black latex paint, so that just in case, it's unlikely, but just in case if you were able to see under the frame and see the layers glued together underneath, rather than seeing all of the like white and light colored stuff, and even light that hits the lens itself. Light will hit the lens, and then you'll be able to see that light on the edge. So that can be kind of distracting. So it's a good idea to go through with that latex paint and just put a covering over the edge so that it makes it nice and dark, and then if anyone ever sees in it, it's just black and it doesn't look distracting or anything like that. So that's basically the final step before you get the lens and frame all good to go. And so you would just let this sit and cure for a little while, and like 30 minutes or so probably. It really does not take long. But again, you might want to let it sit for like a day even, just to cure all the way, and so you don't have to worry about it. So now that's basically all you need for the lenses in the frame. The only thing left is the Foggy Seal, the rubber Foggy Seal. So I've got Chris's shell here. So I do actually want to glue a Foggy Seal into this. If you're getting mesh lenses, again, I'm not going through the mesh lenses because I'm at a crossroads where I don't know if I can really offer the mesh lenses as a kit, because I have to do so much work for them that I basically have to complete the mesh lenses for you. And so I might just only sell a finished version of the mesh lenses and not a kit form, because it's really, I've made dozens of mesh lens sets, and even I struggle to make the mesh lenses. So it's one of those things where I have to make sure that it's something that someone following my instruction can actually do, and I don't know how easy that will be. So if you don't have classic lenses, you don't really need the Fog Seal, because the Fog Seal is only to keep these solid lenses from getting foggy on the inside layer, since there's not a lot of place for your breath to go. And so the Fog Seal just goes in there and it keeps your breath from going right up to your lenses. So I will try my best to do this and let you see what's happening in here. Somehow. Basically, when you're gluing the Fog Seal, you'll start from the middle, right up here above the nose, and that's equal to the middle of the Fog Seal. You'll tack the middle in, and then you'll work your way around the edge, working your way out to the outside, just gluing a little bit at a time. So it's pretty easy when you break it into more digestible little chunks like that. So what I'm going to be gluing specifically on this thing, it's basically two flaps, but attached to these two flaps are another two flaps. Try to make this make sense to you. So you see how there's a flat edge attached to the flap? This tiny flat edge is what is glued to the shell and holds it just perfectly so that the rubber flaps stick out at the right angle that they need to stick out at. So there's a little middle notch on that little outer strip of rubber. And that little middle notch just gives you a good idea of where the middle is on that edge. And so we're starting from the middle there, which, it also lines up with the middle of the nose shape. And we will glue that. The shiny glossy side is facing up. And so we will end up gluing that. This is this is gonna be so hard. Inside a black shell, gluing a black rubber Fog Seal. Bear with me here. This is a difficult thing to teach. So I'm going to take my super glue and I'm just going to put a couple of little dots of glue on this, I've got it folded like this here. You can see this flat edge. Just keep some dots of glue on it there. Just kind of get the middle area with glue on it. And if you mess up, it's pretty easy to just gently pull the rubber out of the face shell. So I'm going to line it up, and I'm paying a lot of attention to the shape that the flaps are making. I want the flaps to make a perfect, groove for the nose. That's the ultimate thing here. And all I'm worrying about right now is getting the middle tacked in place. Everything else is loose. So there we go. I've got the middle tacked in place. Hard to see because of the lack of light. But just the middle part is glued in there. Oh, that's a kind of good angle. And so now I'm going to pick a side and just work along, gluing it underneath the eye socket, and then taking it all the way up to the edge here. Light is not my friend right now. Try to find some way to illuminate this. Oh well, I'll just have to kind of make this work. So you can see it's bending around that bottom of the eye shape. I'll try to just keep moving it around so that you can get glimpses of it when the light bounces off of it. Okay, so man, I had no idea this was going to be so difficult. I definitely might have needed some kind of preparation for this. So I guess I'll just do it and hope you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to go ahead and apply more glue to that edge. Only like an inch or two, because I don't want to glue the whole edge. I don't want it to be this thing that's really difficult to work with. So I'm going to take that edge that I just glued and work it around the bottom of that eye socket. So try to get an angle that you can see it here. Whew, it just does not want to be illuminated. You can kind of see it right there. So you can kind of see how it's going around the bottom of the eye socket there. And then coming up and finishing right here up at the edge. And that just really, it sections the shell off into a bottom part and a top part. And that helps to keep your breath from going right up into the lenses and fogging everything. So I'm going to go ahead and get that last little bit. You want to be careful when you're gluing the fog seal in that there are no gaps between the shell and the fog seal. That doesn't mean you have to like totally completely glue the two pieces together, but it means specifically that you can't stretch the fog seal and let little gaps, because then the air will shoot up through there. So you can kind of see it from that angle. I finally found an angle where you can kind of see it. All the way, goes from the middle here, kind of creates a little flap right here, and so that little flap goes down in between the little gap, the little corner on the side of your nose, and keeps your breath from just going right from here up to your lens. You know, that's the biggest problem, is that your breath basically has nowhere to go but right up into your lenses. So this fog seal works really well to prevent that from happening. So go ahead and twist this other side around here a little bit so that the flat edge is sticking out for me. And as you can see, it can be a little bit of a struggle getting it to work with you. Okay, I got that other one started gluing a little bit. Just trying to move this around so that the light reflects off of it and you can see, because I just did not anticipate these two black glossy surfaces on each other for filming. But it'll hopefully convey the information you need. Okay, see if you can find the light. Okay. So it helps a little bit just to make it make a little more sense. So you can kind of see how it loops around under the eye. Okay, so I think that's glued in there pretty well. And so now, basically the only thing that's left, you'll want to be careful. You'll be tempted to just throw the face shell right on your face once you're done gluing things. But be careful with super glue when it's still drying and getting it too close to your eyes and breathing in the fumes, because the fumes can be really painful if you get them near your eyes. But yeah, so basically the next step here is just to take the foam that's included. So you can take this foam that has this adhesive side and paper backing. You can cut out shapes and then just stick it inside of the shell, and that'll, you know, make it a little softer. And that's mainly for areas that are sharp. Like let's say this chin area is really sharp and you're not able to sand it and get it smoother for whatever reason, and it kind of cuts into your face a little bit, then you can take some of this foam and cut a shape out and stick it in there, and it'll be a little softer on you. And then also you can take some of this upholstery foam, and you can get more of it if you need to, and just glue it in the forehead area like that. Just use some of the super glue, a couple dots of super glue, just glue it into the forehead area, and that helps a lot to keep the shell kind of up and off your face, and it'll kind of absorb a little bit of sweat, so it'll get gross over its lifetime, but it still works really well for the day-to-day wearing a Spider-Man suit. So, oh, and to answer the question I noticed earlier, no, Go2 does not get hot. It does work a lot like hot glue. So I can understand why you would ask that. Basically, Go-To is like a cold hot glue, a cold version of a hot glue gun. The way it comes out, the way it sticks, but it takes longer because a hot glue only has to cool before it's fully set. This stuff actually has to take, it's actually pretty dry and cured already. So it was about 15 minutes ago that I was working on that, I think, and so it only takes that long to do that, and then stick it on and see how everything came together. There you go. You've made a Spider-Man mask. So it's pretty simple. Not the most complicated task in the world. But you need to know how to do it basically before you can do it. And now you've got your magnetic lenses and everything good to go, ready to fight crime. So there you go. There's a lens that I installed in front of you. So yeah, thank you guys for sitting and hanging out with me while I went through everything that there is to see with the face shells. If you have any extra questions, if there's something I didn't cover, or if there's something that you don't understand, please feel free to send me a message at the email address that is included with the kit, or just send me a message here if you're interested in the kit or something like that. To answer your questions, guys, I see you asking about the MCU stuff. Part of this is preparation to get MCU going, because I've definitely stepped up my game in the last 2 months. I'm trying to make this into more of a small business that kind of pays for itself and takes care of itself. And so I'm trying to add more inventory and get this stuff all caught up. That's why I'm out here making this video. And so the MCU is definitely soon. If not in the next like 2 or 3 weeks, then very soon I want to add that to my inventory, sort of, so you can have that to choose from. And I want to do the moving lenses for it too, but I haven't finished the simplified mechanism yet. I want to do something that's more simplistic and less likely to break and takes less effort to make them actually move. And so I need to do that. And then I also have to figure out how the handles and everything work that you'll use to operate them. Like probably, like everyone suggests, using them as like web shooters, incorporating the handles and the buttons into the web shooters will probably be the best way to do it. It'll just mean that you'll have a cable running from behind your head, down your back, down the back of your arms, down into your wrists. But that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Also, I'm thinking a lot about the PlayStation 4 Insomniac lens, and I've already designed the frames, and it fits just fine on the ASM2 shell with the larger ASM2 lenses going with it. And so I've actually thought about the possibility of modifying this into a moving lens kit as well. It'll be difficult because the lens shape is so bulged out that it's going to be difficult to get the sliding mechanisms to move around that dome shape, but I don't think it's going to be impossible. And so I think that that'll be really cool, having a moving lens shell that will be, bigger, much larger eyes. And so, basically my thinking is that once I get everything figured out for the MCU shell with how everything works, and if it's a kit or if I have to sell finished versions, because honestly, I have to be careful with kits, because with this ASM2 kit, it's only once I started getting everything together and organizing everything that I take for granted my own experience. And with the kit of the moving lenses, I really can't have it be where I make the kit, but it's just too difficult for anyone to put together. So I have to be careful with that. because it's, that would be a pretty big disaster if you sold a ton of kits and then everyone needed you to put them together for you. So I'll have to be careful with how that works. So we'll see. Those are kind of the things that slow me down, the difficulties of like organization and figuring out those little things, the little logistical things. But I really like the way the PS4 lenses look. I actually have the frame 3D printing right now out in my garage. And my plan with that is, for now, I'm going to have it so that you can have this lens, and then I'm also going to make a contracted one so that it'll have a much smaller eye opening. So you'd be able to take this lens off and then put the other lens on so that you could get some expressions that way. Yeah, I really like the way the PS4 shell looks. It was kind of weird to me at first, I thought. Just some of the aspects of the shape are kind of weird, but now when I look at it, I really like the shape. I like the positioning of the lenses. It's really kind of a cool, sleek look. And so, yeah, I'm really excited that I'm able to just adapt the shell I already have. Because the good thing about that is I've got this size of shell, and then I've also got this smaller size of shell. These are two completely separate size of face shell. And so it's helpful, that I've already got these two sizes of face shell, and all I have to basically do is pluck the lenses from one and just attempt to get it lined up here. And it should hopefully just pop on no problem. It is difficult because, like you can see here, the shape is at least that much different. It's smaller, the lens is smaller than the ASM2 lens. And then also the frame is pretty weird here in the middle because it goes really close to the nose, really close on the tip of the nose. But I think it'll be pretty simple to just do a modification that just snaps on, and then you can do either one. Because I thought it's kind of cheap if it's a whole nother face shell that you have to buy. If it came to that, I would do that, but I prefer if it was an option that you could just buy a different lens for it. And then I've got other stuff I want to do too, like I want to do the Iron Spider from MCU, but I don't really have any plans right now to do a full suit for that because it's so involved. So it's kind of just a mask on its own at that rate. So I might do that. That's kind of further down. But those are kind of my plans right now with the shells. So we'll see. If you guys are interested again, go ahead and send me a message either to my YouTube account or my email. There will be a link below. And you can also check out my website. I'll have information on the kits there. And yeah, that's where you'll see information on that. And also, big shout out to my Patreon subscribers. You guys are so awesome. I do not shout out enough to you guys, but you are so helpful in the day-to-day of stretching this stuff out, especially like for the month of March. Pretty much I didn't take very many orders because I'm still working out getting these ones done, and so it's difficult when I find myself in times like that when I'm not getting the income from it, but I'm still having to work on it. It's like the Patreon is such a huge help in those times, aside from just regular income. So it really helps a lot. You guys are invaluable. And of course, anyone on Patreon gets first dibs on items. I know I kind of took that reward out, but I still honor it that, my Patreon subscribers get first dibs always. Yeah, that's that stuff. And then I also might have to do a video soon because I'm considering doing the ASM1 shell as a kit as well, because I have had a lot of people ask about that. And also, my prices might change a little bit in the next few weeks. I raised my prices a few months ago, and I'm really happy that I did because I feel like I've always charged too little, and that's been a part of why I get buried under a ton of orders and I can't set aside the time to get it done. But the last few weeks I've charged more for my work and it feels good. People still want to buy it. You know, they don't, it's not like crickets or anything. Like people are willing to pay more for higher quality work, which feels good. But I also think that, you know, with the way I've been able to work out the process and everything, I mean, I was able to just put together a frame in 2 hours. So it wasn't the highest quality because I kind of rushed through it, but you know, I've refined the process from when I started a lot. So a lot of stuff has changed. So that's basically that. It was good to get out here for 2.5 hours. Pretty long stream. Longest stream I've had in a long time. But I always enjoy coming out here, hanging out with you guys. Hope you guys are doing good. Dalton, is it Dalton? Dalton asked how did I get into making face shells? Basically, I got into making face shells because if you don't have a face shell, anyone who does Spider-Man costume stuff knows this. If you don't have a face shell, it's really hard to make the lenses look good. It's the natural human head looks like a weird bean, it has like a weird bean shape, and so just a normal mask and lenses like glued onto the mask just has a really weird look. It doesn't bend well enough, and so that's why the movies were the first ones to do face shells. It's not like I invented face shells or anything. The movies, all the way back to the Raimi movies, like if you watch Spider-Man 1, when Spider-Man and Mary Jane are on top of that roof the first time that he saved her, you can definitely tell he's wearing a face shell when he talks to her. His jaw doesn't move, and the thing won't move. So they've had the face shells in the movies always, and they've always had magnetic lenses too, and that's such a quality of life improvement when you're wearing these costumes, because if you can't take the lenses off and the mask is attached to the costume, that's like claustrophobia right there. Basically, hard to breathe, hard to see. If you have to like talk to someone or do like, you basically need handlers at that point. And the magnetic lens almost removes that need for handlers, because you can take off your lenses if you need to see better in a situation. And you know, basically it's just like there's so many pros to having a face shell. And it really, when you put on a face shell and lenses under a finished suit, it's like the crown jewel, I think. It really ties everything together. And it can make a bad Spider-Man costume look really good too, if that is the situation. Yeah, so that's, you know, I got into that back during like ASM1, just because it just seems like something you need. You need that if you're going to do a good suit. And that was back when Fernando was asking me to work on a suit for him, so I just went ahead and decided to do it. I did a plaster bust of his head, sculpted the face shell on his head, and that's where I started with that. Alex asked, why did I remove the grooves on the face shell? And basically what he's asking is, originally I had some grooves on the face shell that when you would wear the face shell with my pattern, my costume pattern, the seams would line up perfectly with those grooves. So the seam would sink into the groove and smooth out that seam. Because usually, a lot of times when there's a seam underneath fabric, unless it's really well sewn, it's extra thickness underneath the fabric. And with spandex, it's stretching, and so it actually can make that more visible. Like maybe you can see that a little bit here, that there's a seam in the middle here, and so it kind of makes a little bit of a mountain range, just kind of where it comes up together. And the movie costume did that too, but I had the idea to add a groove into the face shell so that rather than having the seam stick up, it would sink into that groove. But after a few years of doing that, what I noticed was that it works with my patterns. It works pretty well with my designs of patterns. But then if someone ever wanted to do like a symbiote suit or a suit that was all white, like white fabric, you would end up being able to see those little grooves through the fabric. Basically, if there was no seam there, it just made this kind of weird, wonky impression. So now I'm more in the camp that it's better just not to have those grooves, and you might see seams kind of bump up a little bit. It's not that big a deal. The movie suits, the seams bump up a little bit, and it's not a huge deal, but it is kind of more of a huge deal that you can see those grooves on different mask varieties, and so I didn't like that. So I just decided to take those out completely and not have that be an issue to deal with. Evil asked about my Vegeta armor. That's sitting on the ground over there right now. It's not assembled yet. Everything is still all taped together, but I'll give a little preview of it here. This is one of the shoulder straps from the back. This isn't the front. Gold paint turned out pretty well, but the biggest problem with it is that if you touch it a lot, it starts to kind of get messed up. Like this link is older than these two, so you can kind of see that the link gets kind of like dulled as I touch it. So I've just been trying really hard not to touch these two very much. But yeah, I'm really happy and excited about how it's all coming together. And you know, frankly, it's really, really hard for me not to work on this. I'm basically like, I really do wonder if I suffer from ADHD, and it's like so hard for me not to concentrate on this, which is, in a way, it's a strength because I'm able to, like, I can't help but focus on projects like this. But then it is also a huge detriment to my life because I need to get these face shells done. I need to ship face shells out. And when I work on stuff like this, people just get so mad. Most people are patient and understanding, but you know, I really, really have been trying to only work on this project like at the end of the day, the very end of the day, like at 8 o'clock at night, you know, 2 or 3 hours before I go to bed. That's when I'll, you know, sit down and start sanding a few pieces. And so it's kind of unique for me because usually when I do a project, I do it all at once and I just work for like a week straight and get it all done. But with this one, I'm actually able to kind of pace it a little bit and get stuff done later, afterwards, and I'm actually kind of able to balance the two projects, which is something that I've always been really bad at. It's like always one or the other for me. I'm always working on the thing I want to work on or the sales items I have, because I've been doing sales for like years, but always struggled with it. Yeah, I'm really excited for this. Yeah, I want to do live streams of the armor, but the biggest thing is that I've got some kind of unique ideas that I'm implementing into it. I don't want to release those too early. I want to kind of release those with the final product so you can see it, because I've got some neat stuff going on with this armor that I think will end up making it look really cool. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited for this. I might even start to sell this, but that's kind of, I'll have to make molds of all the pieces and everything like that. So we'll see how that goes. But it's definitely the most like clean and refined thing I've ever made. So I'm pretty happy with how that all is turning out so far. I love 3D printing so much. It only took me about 30 minutes to model the PS4 frame. I've already got that printing out in the garage, but this frame was really easy to model. And so I love 3D printing. 3D printing has changed my life for the better, definitely. I definitely wouldn't be able to add all these different kinds of shells and quickly print a small size shell and, you know, all that stuff that really 3D printing just makes possible. And I can see some people, I've heard before, people don't like 3D printing because it's almost too easy. It takes out the craftsmanship, all the skill, all that. You know, it's kind of an argument that's followed humanity through all of our history, that every time a new tool has shown up, that tool is kind of villainized. It's like, oh, it's too easy. It makes it too easy. It needs to be harder. You need to suffer and work hard. But the reality is, humanity's one of our greatest strengths is our ability to create tools, and it's just a matter of learning to use the tool and not rely too much on it. And I think 3D printing, that's especially true, because I could see someone at this point only learning to 3D print. But if you only knew how to 3D print, you really wouldn't know how to put armor together. You wouldn't know how to get things working right, like the movement and everything. So I'm kind of happy that 3D printing came into my life when it did, that I've got enough experience in other areas with like sewing and everything that I was able to add 3D printing like a tool rather than a crutch that just kind of takes over everything. Hey Lego Builder, what's up? Long time no see. Always good to see you guys. Although I really apologize that it's been a while since I've last streamed. The last few months have just been a lot of, like I said, I'm kind of trying to step up my game and turn this more into a business and get everything organized. But the organization is really what I struggle with. So getting streams like this ready to go, it took me like 2 days of preparation just to get this stream ready to go, of cleaning and stuff. So it's tough for me to get out here and actually get these streams going. But once they do, I really do enjoy sitting out here and hanging out with you guys. Alex asked, have you ever considered working on a suit of someone else's pattern? I've done that before. I've worked on other people's patterns before, and I'm sure it's changed a lot. I'm sure people have gotten a lot better. But one thing I've noticed from working at other people's patterns is it might be rare that pattern. It might be rare for a pattern designer to know how to sew. I think like that's kind of key. You have to know how to sew so that you know where the parts of your pattern are going. If you don't know how spandex comes together, if you don't know how to sew, if you don't know what's possible with the sewing machine and spandex, it's possible for a designer to kind of just fudge so many aspects. And that's the experience I had when the last print I worked on that wasn't mine. There's a lot of things that I just had no clue. They just weren't measured properly. They didn't go together right. And with my patterns, I put so much time into making sure that every little bit lines up perfectly, so that it's not like that. So it's not a struggle like that. But even still, it's really hard to make a pattern that goes together like that. And as you might have noticed, I don't really do a lot of pattern stuff anymore, just because it's really tough. It's hard to get spandex to fit right and get the colors right, and sewing is really hard to get the sewing just perfect. And yeah, I kind of feel like I achieved what I wanted to achieve out of those last few Spider-Man patterns I did, and I wasn't very interested in the MCU suit, but I do like the PlayStation 4 suit pretty well. So I might make a pattern for that. I've been kind of thinking about that lately, and I think those knuckle guards that he has are really cool. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to end up making those, including the texture that they've got. They've got a really neat texture all over them. I've got some ideas for how I'd probably do that. And I'm going to do the texture on the PlayStation 4 lenses too, because it's clear with PlayStation 4, they just loaded that suit with textures. They just had a texture file, and they just put textures on the lens, put texture on the fabric, put texture on the knuckle guards. Good, Lego Builder. Lego Builder asked me questions a few months ago about his own channel and how to get it going, and it's tough. If you're out there and wanting to do YouTube stuff, it's a competitive, difficult thing to be on YouTube and try to be successful, because I feel like most of us, when we do this stuff, when we put ourselves out there, when you start, you're exposing yourselves to friends and family. Like your friends are looking at it on Facebook, your family is looking at it on Facebook, and at the start, they're way less likely to criticize you. They're going to be more understanding that you're just starting, you're young, and that's a big part. You need to kind of go through that stage of being young and inexperienced and having that as like, okay, that's why this thing is a little wonky because you're young and inexperienced. But it's hard because as you start to get onto like YouTube, YouTube is like getting up into the jet stream. It's like you're flying a kite in a nice easy breeze, and then once you get onto YouTube, it's like a jet stream where you're not putting yourself out only to your friends and family. It's if you want to be successful, you have to be appealing to strangers, just total strangers, and they're going to be more likely to be like, "What is this?" Like they have that kind of attitude of like less like, oh, well, there's my friend. I'll overlook some of the shortcomings because it's my friend and they're doing something. Whereas when you just present to uh, strangers, they're way more likely to judge you harshly. So you get more honest feedback, which is good, but then also it can be devastating. Yeah, so there you go. Like I said, back when you were asking me questions, the key is you have to find your X factor. Like what is the thing that only you can deliver to the YouTube audience that people can't get from anywhere else? Because if they can, they will. They're not going to go to someone unknown because that's the biggest hard part is starting out unknown, starting out with only a few subscribers. Because then people look at that and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to subscribe to someone who only has a few subscribers. Whereas I feel like now I'm getting way more subscribers constantly just because they probably see how many I have and decide, oh, well, if those other thousands of people are subscribed, then there must be something for me to subscribe to. So there's kind of a psychology to that of getting people interested and getting your channel started. You have to really, get that X factor up and off the ground. Okay, so I have been going for over 2.5 hours now. This has been a good one. This has been a nice long one. I definitely want to get out here and stream more often. You asked earlier about if I could stream working on the Vegeta armor. I do want to eventually get into a place where I'm not necessarily teaching tutorial stuff. Like I'm still behind, I feel like. I'm behind in that I have to teach this stuff. I have to get the fundamentals out and then eventually I'll be able to just stream whatever I'm doing at that time. But right now, I have catch up to do. I have to do the moving lenses. I have to do these tutorials, and then also I'm just still learning a lot about 3D printing and making armor. Like I've learned so much just in the last 2 months while working on this Vegeta armor, on the different aspects of 3D printing large pieces of armor and getting everything to come together. It's been pretty difficult, overcoming a few certain things. I wonder, if I were to stream while doing that, I don't want to lead you down a bad path, basically. Like if I'm about to make a mistake, it's okay if I show you the mistake and how I overcome the mistake, because then it's like I'm teaching you how I recover from my mistakes, but I don't want to make the mistake and then have you go off repeating that mistake, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah, I've thought about doing the Iron Spider. That is going to be a challenge to get to look good, and that's why they did it with CG, because there's so much armor and things that just CG works because you can have hard armor just bend and kind of compress into nothing. But when you actually have a body underneath it and you actually have physics to worry about, that's when you're having to worry about where armor is collapsing. If it's rubber, it's wrinkling. You can't just make a rubber piece of armor and just think, oh, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna wrinkle. It's gonna deform in weird ways. Like specifically, watch Deadpool, and I find it very distracting his shoulder pads in the movie. They're always wrinkling and folding, and it like really distracts me. Um, so it's really hard to do. That's something with a CG suit that just never happens. His CG suit's just gonna be perfect. Um, so we'll see. But yeah, I do at least want to do a face shell because basically for Iron Spider, because basically the Iron Spider is just Homecoming, it looks like, but with a glossy look and a slightly different uh, alteration to the design to make it look a little bit more like Iron Man armor, which it has a design element that I designed years ago for my Iron Spider concept. I designed an Iron Spider concept. You can see a little picture of it on my website if you scroll down the homepage a little bit. And I actually designed the armor segmented so that it looks like the webbing for Spider-Man, and that I hadn't seen that anywhere at that point. The Iron Spider was just glossy red and gold, so it didn't have the like segmented look that Tony's armor has, combined with like the flat, sleek look. So that's kind of part of why I didn't dive right into the Iron Spider. I'm a little sour grapes because I had that idea like 2 or 3 years ago, and I just didn't see it through. I didn't design it all the way and then print it and put it together. So, I end up here 2 years later having to look like, oh, if only I had actually gotten that done. But that has happened to me a lot of times. Basically, if you think you have a really good idea, act on it. Act on it quickly because you don't own the idea. Just because you came up with the idea doesn't mean that someone else isn't going to have the same stimuli that will make them have the idea too. Basically, like when you have an idea, it's because you saw certain things. You saw a Spider-Man suit, you saw an Iron Man suit, and it made you have that idea. So other people might be having that exact idea at that exact same time. So you have to be fast when you have a good idea. That's one thing I've learned. You can't just sit on something in your back pocket and assume that someday you'll be able to come back to it and it'll still be original. But that's kind of just the way I work. I tend to fill little bubbles where stuff doesn't exist. Like the Vegeta armor. That's a good example. Basically, I don't think I've ever seen someone do like a sort of realistic Saiyan armor that, like, if it were an actual military, like a space military force, what it might look like. Because if you ever look at a Dragon Ball Z, like a Vegeta costume, where they do the foam vest, it never looks menacing or intimidating or official. It never has any of that stuff. It always looks like foam mat, made in the style of the vest, but it doesn't capture the feeling of that, the feeling. And that's a big thing when you're adapting from one medium, like manga or anime, to another, like film or reality. You've got to translate that because that's why I think a lot of real Vegeta costumes, like the Saiyan vest at least, fall short. I've seen some really cool ones that people do good jobs with it. It just doesn't look practical, and it doesn't look like a real piece of armor. So that's kind of what has drawn me towards that. It's just like it doesn't exist. It's a vacuum. And so it's like, oh, I've got freedom in that vacuum. I can kind of work in there and get stuff done. I'm catching up on comments here. Yeah, that's cool. It's a cool idea. A display cabinet for your comics. That'd be neat. You have to be careful. Here's one thing that I've noticed. It's difficult when you learn from YouTube and then also try to present on YouTube. Um, I've had people. I've seen people do their own videos with stuff that I feel like I kind of came up with and brought to the table, and I see those videos and it kind of, my initial reaction is to kind of get frustrated, but then I think about it and it's like, well, there are definitely times when I go to YouTube, like when I'm with 3D printing, if I'm struggling with something, I'll go to YouTube to learn how to do something specific, like how to fix the problem I'm having, and then I go to make a video about whatever the project I'm working on, and I realize I'm doing the same thing. You know, it's really hard not to just take someone else's YouTube video and learn the knowledge and then present that knowledge as your own. You know, because it kind of, you know, that person learned it from someone. You know, it's one of those things where it's hard to credit people and be original, and then also not to be mad when people do something similar to you, because that's how it works. You know, we learn on YouTube, and then we some of us go out and we teach too on YouTube. So it's kind of a fine line to walk. Okay, yeah. So been a good day of streaming. Hopefully this stream had all the information. I'm sure anyone who is watching this for the Faceshell stuff has stopped watching a long time ago. Sure. Here's my Birdman mask. This is one of the first 3D printing projects I ever did, about a year ago, actually. I actually have some tutorial videos or stream videos with Birdman. But yeah, this is the first 3D printing like wearable helmet I did, and I was just like shocked when I did it how well it turned out. You know, it's so glossy and smooth. 3D printing is just really so amazing at what it can do. It's a little too small. I made it probably about 5 or 10% too small for my head. Probably fit on a smaller head just fine, but I've got a big head. But it's pretty funny, you know. Just amazing what you can do with 3D printing and stuff. For this, I think I just used PLA filament. I really like using PLA filament rather than ABS. Those are kind of the two main ones. And then you've got PETG and other types. But PLA and ABS are the two main ones. And this is actually ABS plastic too. ABS plastic is great. But I like PLA because it's actually really stiff and strong. And what that means is that it's easy to sand, sand down the surface to a uniform height, but not sand so much that you're taking away the shape or the details, and then fill it in between those gaps. It makes it really easy to just kind of make sure you don't sand too much away at it. So I like it a lot. That's how I've been doing the whole Vegeta armor, is just PLA plastic. It's the easiest way to do it. And I have 3 printers, and it took me about 3 weeks of solid printing to print that Vegeta armor. So it can definitely take a while. Corey asked, what material would you use as a mold to cast rubber? And I would say silicone. Silicone is the best mold making material by far. It's difficult if you're wanting to cast something out of silicone, because silicone basically doesn't stick to anything except other silicones. So when you want to cast something out of silicone, you'll need a different material for your mold. But really, silicone doesn't stretch or shrink very much. But it stretches, but it doesn't shrink very much. And then it doesn't stick to anything, so it's really easy to just pour in like urethane rubber or something like that, and then it just comes right out. Like, for example, this is my mold for the Fog Seal, the rubber Fog Seal that goes under the eyes and above the nose that I taught how to install. And this is a silicone mold. This is just a chunk of silicone that I poured over the shape of these Fog Seals. You can even see them because I used clear silicone. And that's why I use clear silicone. It's because then you can see when you're making your mold if there are any air bubbles or anything like that. So you can actually see my rubber Fog Seals inside of the silicone. I pour it like this, you know. Basically this shiny surface is just the self-leveled top. And all I have to do is work one of the corners out here. And it's easy as that. If that was a chest spider, you'd have a chest spider right now. So it's really easy. You just want to make sure that you're molding it so that like it sits perfectly flat. If you're doing a chest spider, you want to make sure it's totally level so that when you fill in your actual urethane into there, it's not thin on one side and thick on another. But that's definitely something I'd have to get into a little more in depth to teach you how to do it completely. And urethane stuff can be pretty difficult. It can be difficult to cast it. It can be difficult to glue it. I've always struggled with urethane rubber. And like that's how people do on Spider-Man suits. They'll do the thicker metal-looking webbing. They'll use urethane for that. And I've never glued a set of urethane webs down to a Spider-Man suit before. I just don't have a lot of experience with it, and I've never had the need to do it. But yeah, it's a pretty difficult stuff. Anytime your materials are having to stretch and deform or anything like that, it really just makes things so much more complicated. Hey Diego, I remember you a little bit, but it's hard when I don't actually know you. I've never actually met you, so I remember Diego, the name, a little bit, but not much more past that. Diego, you also asked earlier if PLA plastic was malleable. No, it's not really. Unless you print like a really thin wall, then it will kind of fold and flex. But if you're printing a thick structure, it shouldn't be a problem. I'm actually going to go check really quick and see if the new frames are done printing, because that'd be pretty cool to show you. Okay, they're done. Sorry for the downtime. My empty YouTube channel for a minute. But here's the first look at my PS4 frame. Of course, it's just freshly printed, so it's rough. But a little bit of sanding, add the texture to it. Oh, that looks really cool. Oh, that's gonna look really cool. Yeah, I'm excited. This only took me like 30 minutes to model. It's such an easy model. Yeah, exciting. Now I just have to print the other one. And then it would basically just be an option. You'd just be able to buy probably the same way these frames will be already cut and sanded and bent. You just would buy either, I'll sell the completed version, but then I'll also consider doing the kit version as well. The biggest thing with these frames, and I'll try to show it to you here, is it goes so much lower than the ASM2 frames. So if you can see here, it's so much lower on the face than the ASM2 frames. The inner corner is like right here, and on this one, it's like all the way down there. So it's just going to be key that if someone were to put this together as a kit, you have to know that the lens kind of misses this magnet slot a little bit. It's going to have to kind of go down and past that. So I'll have to just figure out a way to make that easy enough to figure out. Yeah, that'll be really cool. I started that last night. I just kind of had the thought that it worked well enough that, you know, it'd be an easy enough thing to just finish. Finish it up. You'd actually be surprised, Duan Asian. He said that it'll probably be a lot easier to do the moving lenses for this than it would be for MCU. Actually, I'd say it's probably the opposite, because for one thing, there's going to be more movement. It's going to have to move further. There are going to have to be larger shutters inside that go up and down, and the eye hole is larger, so it has to be further down. So that's one reason why I don't even know if it's actually going to work, because, and then also, it's just generally more of a dome shape, which makes it difficult for all of the different stuff underneath, because it's not like it would be one thing to make a moving lens. Everything was nice and flat. It would just be back and forth. That's easy. But this is, you know, moving around a dome shape and then also having to stay really, really flat. So it's a big challenge. But yeah, so Diego asked if I'm going to vacuum form them later. No, I'll probably make silicone molds, because I'm actually also going to try to add the texture to the lens as well, because the lens frame has a little bit of texture to it. So I'm going to try to add a little texture. And actually, I kind of teased how I'm going to do that when I did this to the spray bottle earlier. I just added all these extra chads, hanging chads from the mesh onto the spray bottle by just smoothing it out and pressing it on there. I'll probably basically just do the same thing to try and add the texture onto the frames themselves. But we'll see. I don't think the texture's that crucial. I just think that, you know, it'd be a little further I could go with it. Okay, well, how cool is that? I'm glad I got to show you guys the finished PS4 frames before I quit. And I'm here at about 3 hours. Answer your question, Lego Builder. Lego Builder asked, is it possible to do frames without 3D printing and molds or silicone or plastic or anything? Absolutely. I think, honestly, I don't know where that other, oh, here it is. I made this mock-up lens here. I just used this same adhesive foam. It's got a backing, a removable backing, paper backing, and it's adhesive. So basically I just cut the shape of the lens frame, and then I cut another one that was slightly thinner and stuck that on top of it. And I think if you just plasti dip that, you'd have a pretty solid frame already. I mean, I think that would basically sell it. So you don't need 3D printing or any, because it's like, you know, the goal is whatever you want it to be. You know, if you want to be Spider-Man, you can use the soda bottle lens technique, and you know, you can get a cheaper Zentai pattern, you know, and still accomplish that. It's just, you know, where I come in is if you want to get real accurate, if you want to get like up to the movie, and you know, and that's like a different goal. That's to go to conventions or to birthday parties or, you know, events or things like that. That's where that kind of comes into play. Alex, I don't know what you mean about muscle shading. Yeah, I don't know if you mean if I am pro muscle shading or what, or if I don't like it. Basically, if you don't know what muscle shading is when you've got a spandex costume that is supposed to look like a person is really muscular underneath. The thing about spandex is it totally smooths out any kind of features like muscles or indentation. It goes between the high spots. So if you put Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime into a spandex suit, it would just look like a smooth spandex suit. I mean, he'd still obviously be really built and everything, but you wouldn't see all the definition. So what the muscle shading does is it kind of simulates what it would be like if you were to like glue the spandex into the kind of the indentations between muscles. You get some shading. You start to get areas where the light, you get shadows and stuff. So instead of gluing it, you just print the actual shadows themselves onto the costume, and then that makes it look like there's definition that isn't actually there. And I think it can look really cool as long as it stays natural. That's the key. Make it natural. There are so many muscle suits out there where you can just see all the muscle definition and everything, and it doesn't look like the person underneath is muscular. It looks like they're wearing a suit with a bunch of muscles printed on it. What it's supposed to look like is it's supposed to look like the shading that naturally comes from the different shapes that aren't there. So you don't want it to look like a really defined pec muscle with creases and everything. You want it to look like what the shading would actually look like, so that rather than people looking at it and going, oh, that's muscle shading, they look at it and they go, oh wow, that guy's ripped. You want it to actually fool people into thinking that it's definition and not printed on the suit. So it's got to be really subtle and not just really defined. And a lot of people don't really get that. Diego asked, what do you think about a foam face shell? And I'll stop you right there, because the problem is, unless it's a really stiff foam, like you back it up with plastic or something, the problem is that these spandex masks have to be really tight in order to make a really nice, smooth shape. If it's not tight and pulling, then it's going to be wrinkly and baggy. And so what comes along with that tightness is that it's always really pushing on the face shell. It's pushing from every direction a lot. And so if you do your face shell with really thin plastic, or like how you're talking about with foam, you might be able to get it to work, but what will happen is that it's going to get pressed down in a lot of ways, and it's going to lose. And usually what happens is it gets squeezed. It gets squeezed like this because it's basically 2 versus 1. You've got 2 side forces wanting to fold and squeeze the face shell in half, and then 1 pressing on it from the top. But these ABS shells are so good at keeping their shape and never, they do bend if they get thin, if the plastic is thin, but yeah, that's actually kind of good because it tapers and feathers the edge into your real shape of your head. But otherwise, you really want it to be stiff and to hold the shape that it has. But again, it all depends on what you want. If you want a foam face shell that feels a little bit better but might end up looking a little less accurate, go for it. There's no rules. Yeah, Lego Builder mentioned that he thought about using a Walmart face shell, the Spider-Man face shells they sell at like Walmart and stuff, and that would totally work if it fits your head and it looks good. Would never fit my head in a million years, but if it fits your head and it looks fine, then yeah, I mean that's easy. Corey asked if I've ever made lenses for a mask that doesn't have a face shell. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I had to have at some point. But basically, as the second I started getting into lenses, I realized that, yeah, there's a reason they do face shells in the movies. It's because it's just really hard. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I've done lenses without face shells because I used to do the Spider-Man 3. He had the black costume, the symbiote suit. That was some of the first Spider-Man stuff I got into. And I was making lenses for that one, and it was really hard. And that was back when I was also only making my lenses with sheets of acrylic. I would cut the lens shape out, heat it up, and then bend it, but it would only bend in one direction. I wouldn't be able to get the curve. Basically, like this lens is a dome. It bends this way, and then it also bends this way. So it's a total curve, whereas the ones that I was doing before, I would only be able to get this curve. And it just didn't look very good. And then, you know, once again, the human head naturally has kind of got this peanut shape to it. It's not like the face shells. What they do is they give it more of a dynamic, cool, sleek look to your head, where the top of your head is bigger than your jaw. You know, it kind of tapers down. Usually that's not what happens with the head. Most people, the top of their head is kind of small and dinky and about the same width as their jaw. And so it just kind of looks like this weird peanut head sort of. Like here, well, I would show you, but I actually have a really natural kind of like face shell shaped head. I've got a really big head. So lenses don't look that awkward, or masks don't look that awkward on me, but you can still kind of see just that without a face shell. So without a face shell, you know, you kind of, it's just too thick right here without being thick enough around here, you know, and it just kind of has this weird look to it, you know, it's got a weird, you know, it would do. And once again, I'll say I've kind of got a better looking head shape than most for face shells, but it still kind of lacks the cool, sleek shape that you get from a face shell. And then without a face shell, then also your lenses have to stick up off of your head and can't necessarily be as dropped in. Although I will say I like being able to see my chin move. I hate the way when you wear a face shell and you talk, your face is just frozen and static unless you can successfully do the moving jaw, which is really tough. So yeah, that's that. All right, this has been a fun stream. I've been out here for a while. D1 Asian asked, could a spandex Batman cowl with a face shell or some kind of separate solid understructure work well? You just described exactly how the original 1966 Batman mask works. It actually is a face shell. If you look at some pictures of it, there's a hard shell that they made for the 1960 or 69, I don't know, the 60s Batman. He's got a hard shell, and actually the front of his face is black, and it's got some painted on details, but you can tell that the front is actually like hard. It's not fabric. It's got structure underneath it, and then the spandex, you know, is sewn onto it from there, and it kind of, you know, smooths out into the rest of the suit. So that's, you know, there you go. That's at least one use of a Batman cowl using a face shell, and probably the first. I mean, I don't know what else would have been before that, because spandex was not that old. That's kind of a newer material. Corey said, what if you did spandex, or what if you did elastic between two parts of a shell to do the moving jaw? And I knew this was going to come up after I just mentioned it. The thing that's hard about the moving jaw is that, so let's say I've got this face shell split in half so that the jaw can come down. Well, what will end up happening is when there's a space here, the spandex will stretch and fill into that space. The spandex doesn't want to just really smoothly cover this gap. The spandex will define those edges, and you'll be able to see those hard edges really well. And so basically what you have to do in order to do moving jaw, and I've thought about this a lot because I've always wanted to offer it without it being a ton of effort. You need the top part of the shell to come down far enough that it can overlap enough that they don't come apart when you move the bottom jaw, but then you also need the shape that when the bottom jaw does come down, it doesn't, come apart from the top part, if you can understand what I mean. And so it's possible because they did it for the movie, but I've never had a lot of luck with it because the spandex is always on so tight that you can see if ever there is a gap or an opening between these two shell parts, you can see it pretty easily. And I've thought of doing like rubber and things like that. But then if you do rubber, you lose the strength that I've talked about, where the mask will press in on it. So I put a lot of thought in that. And if I had to, I have some ideas that would probably make it work. But it's just not that big a deal. It's someday I wouldn't be surprised if that's the state of face shells everyone's offering, moving jaws and stuff. But right now, it's just not that big a deal. Oh, that's cool. Lego builders making a Jedi costume. Yeah, when I was younger, I did that too. That's definitely one of those ones when you're younger that like something about the Jedi uniform is just neat. The tan and brown colors and the leather, like boots and belt and accessories and all that. It's just cool and it all comes together. I was about your age when the Star Wars prequels were coming out, and that was the coolest thing. I wanted a Jedi suit and stuff, but oh yeah, I did. I worked on a Star Wars fan film in middle school, and we did a bunch of Jedi robes. And the good thing about Jedi robes is that you just need to find materials and fabrics that look like hand woven and old and ancient, and just kind of pack them together uh, and what's the word? Uh, Man, I can't think of it. I'm spacing a lot of words today. I don't know why. Um, like tarnish it, like beat it up so that it looks like it's been worn by a Jedi for a long time. It looks cool when it's clean too, but it's just easier to just dirty it up and make it look worn in and used. Yeah, that's cool. That's what I was going to say. Is that the original Jedi robes were? I thought they were Indian, but yeah, African sounds right too. Um, but yeah, that's what the original costume designers did. They just found actual, authentic, handmade. It's like that's you just kind of have to think about the logic of the project that you're working on. Like with the Saiyan armor that I'm working on, the logic is it's a sci-fi sort of army, alien invader army, basically is what the Saiyans were. And so it would make sense that it would be this semi-ornate, more practical, more utilitarian. Maybe possibly even they didn't design it themselves. They stole it from another race that they conquered, and that other race designed it for them. But still, it's got the gold and the things because it would be a presence of intimidation. It's a lot of it would be intimidation. So it's figuring out the logic and the world building of the suit or the costume you're working on. That's what a lot of filmmaking costume design is. It's like figuring out how it fits really well and just helps to tell the story. Weathering. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. A lot of brain farts today for some reason, getting ready for streaming. Okay, well, I've been out here for 3 hours, and I'm pretty hungry, so I think I'm going to go ahead and call it at that. And I hope that I got all the information out that I needed to. I'll probably end up coming back and redoing these tutorials when I get tired of them being too long-winded, or maybe even edit them down just to the good parts. But that, again, is something I have to sit down and actually plan my time around, and I'm so bad at that. So maybe someday. Um, but yeah, it was really great to see you guys. It's good hanging out with you guys. I'll call an end to answering comments there, or else I'll just be here all night. Um, so yeah, it's good to see you guys. If you're interested in kits at all, just send me a message, and check out my Patreon if you have not already. I always am thankful for the support I get from that. And yeah, great to see you guys, and have a happy time until the next time I'm on here streaming.